With both hands brutally severed, the soul of a fallen kingdom who witnessed his homeland's destruction has now opened his eyes 10 years in the past, in the enemy king's palace, as the enemy's third prince in a daze. The shadow of Kairos' Balkan magic legion still ravages before my eyes. I watched helplessly as my comrade in arms, my dear friend Reaver, lunged forward to shield me from a fatal arrow. Blood sprayed from his chest as he coughed up mouthfuls of crimson. His body went limp and collapsed, dying right before my eyes. A surge of rage instantly consumed me. I picked up a sword from the ground. His body slid down along my blade and fell heavily onto the cold battlefield. I gazed at his lifeless corpse. A cry of anguish tore from my throat. I gripped the sword tightly in my hands. After roaring to the heavens, I charged into the enemy formation like a madman. Enemy magic rained down like a storm. I plunged red-eyed into the torrent of spells, slashing wildly. One strike left, cleaving through flames. One strike right, severing lightning. Corpses littered the ground as I killed with abandon. The blue mage chanted an incantation, blue magic blasting forth. A sharp pain struck me, and I looked down abruptly. My left arm had been severed, blood gushing like a fountain. I gritted my teeth against the excruciating pain, and continued swinging my sword in a frenzied slaughter. At that moment, a blinding light exploded from the ground, an orange magic circle rising. The oppressive death aura emanating from that magic circle instantly seized my throat. I knew I was powerless to resist alone, but I still gripped my broken sword tight, determined to fight to the death. The next second, devastating magic crashed down like a tsunami. My right arm was severed in response. I collapsed completely to my knees. I looked into the distance at the instigator of this catastrophe. It was Kairos' Mad King, he who ground my beloved homeland into a living hell, and the blue mage in his magic robes proudly declared himself the commander of the magic legion. He walked slowly to my broken body and coldly demanded to know who I was. I used my last breath to roar in response. I am a loyal blade to the king, before I could finish. His magic pierced through my chest. In my final moments, I witnessed my beloved, my cherished homeland crumbling into ruin. The moment I saw all light completely extinguished. When I opened my eyes again, everything was completely unfamiliar. The little elephant attendant gently urged me to get up, reminding me time was running short. I should head to the dining hall for breakfast. I sat up abruptly, my heart pounding wildly. I instinctively looked at my hands, unable to help but speak. These hands were clearly severed. The servants around me whispered among themselves at these words, and the little elephant attendant's next words struck me like lightning. Prince Franz will arrive at the dining hall soon. The second prince of Kairos, the instigator who destroyed my homeland? My shocked exclamation startled the little elephant attendant. He worriedly asked if I'd had a nightmare, his repeated questions full of anxiety. The name I hated to the core, the arms I'd lost and regained, these palace scenes I'd never seen before, plus the memories belonging to the third prince in my mind, and my own memories of war and destruction, made me unable to help but ask the little elephant attendant, "Who am I?" The little elephant attendant looked puzzled, yet clearly answered, "You are the third prince of Kairos." I urgently asked what year and day it was now. When I heard the answer 522, I was completely stunned. This was 10 years before the last war. As my thoughts churned, I remembered the war's beginning, that mysterious treasure called the Axis of Time, which possessed the power to turn back time once. One day it suddenly appeared in Cyclidia's palace. When news spread, the continental hegemon Kairos immediately grew greedy, arrogantly demanding we hand over the Axis of Time. Even though Kairos was a powerful force, we could never give such a dangerous thing to an enemy nation. So we firmly refused their demand, and Kairos launched a war against us without hesitation. In my memory, Brother Chase anxiously tried to stop me from going to the battlefield, saying all who went to battle died, and in the end, he witnessed my death with his own eyes. Wait, could it be? A thought struck me. Did Chase use the Axis of Time to reverse time? If this truly was Chase's only chance for me to save our homeland, I absolutely couldn't waste it. As my emotions surged, the little elephant attendant carefully reminded me that while I might not enjoy breakfast gatherings, we really couldn't delay any longer. I rose and walked to the window, pushing it open. The view outside was elegant and peaceful, serene in every way. I took a deep breath of the fresh morning air, my mind settling slightly. To seize this hard-won opportunity, I must live well as Kairos' third prince. I gripped the window frame tightly with both hands, slowly turned around, a cold smile spreading across my face. I ordered the little elephant attendant to prepare everything immediately and follow me. Soon we arrived at the breakfast venue. The first prince had clearly already arrived. I quickly walked to the dining table with the little elephant attendant. I knew full well that Kairos' three princes were all half-brothers. The first prince was of divine nation Danhill's bloodline. Though the king ordered us to eat together every day according to the memories in my mind, he always treated the third prince as invisible. As expected, when I entered and apologized for being late, he showed no reaction whatsoever. Being so blatantly ignored annoyed me greatly, but I didn't show it, simply taking my seat. I thought to myself, the other one who hasn't arrived yet must be him. The next second, an attendant announced that the second prince had arrived, but when I saw him, I couldn't help but freeze. What royal family in the world would dress like this and run around? Is this really the Mad King from my memory who destroyed my homeland? Just from this outfit alone, he certainly lives up to the word mad. In the third prince's memories, the first prince never dared provoke the second prince, because the current queen of Kairos was the second prince's mother, that poisonous queen. In this palace, no one could rival her power. I really don't know how to survive in a place like this. I looked him up and down. The first prince appeared distant and cold, looking like nothing concerned him. The second prince's words and actions were crude and vulgar, completely lacking royal bearing. I desperately told myself to play the role of third prince well. I couldn't waste the opportunity Chase gave me, but I couldn't help thinking, it was this very person before me, the second prince of Kairos, who destroyed my homeland. I truly wished I could kill him right now. Deep inside me, the hatred born from my homeland homeland's destruction kept surging to the surface. Perhaps my gaze was too direct. The second prince suddenly exploded in rage, throwing things, angrily cursing that I dared look at him that way. Just then, the first prince sternly rebuked the second prince. The second prince glared at me through gritted teeth. The first prince set down his teacup, gesturing for the second prince to sit, but the second prince stubbornly refused to sit down. The first prince's gaze turned to me. The second prince also stared over. I pretended to be confused, acting completely oblivious. The second prince irritably grabbed at his hair, complaining that those cursed blood eyes ruined his appetite, and turned to leave without looking back. Then the first prince also stood up, coldly warning me to watch my behavior, saying the king's birthday was approaching, now wasn't the time to stir up trouble. I was stunned. Huh? Was this disturbance somehow my fault? That guy clearly started it first. After the second prince left, the little elephant attendant immediately came forward to ask with concern if I was alright. He knelt on one knee, carefully wiping the stain that had splattered on my shoes. Even though he watched the third prince being ignored every day, he still took care like this, as if caring for his own body. Having someone like this by my side was truly fortunate, despite the misfortune. I reached out and patted the little elephant attendant's shoulder, thanking him. I could feel his surprise. After all, normally the third prince would only shed silent tears, yet now I was actually smiling. A memory about the third prince's mother suddenly surfaced in my mind, Kyrus's first queen. She had jet black hair, red eyes that seemed to contain sacred fire, and the third prince was the only one who inherited her appearance. Unfortunately, the power he possessed was extremely weak. Even more pitifully, the third prince always tried to hide his red eyes, simply because the second prince didn't like them, always using the insulting term cursed blood eyes to address him. Thinking of these memories that didn't belong to me, like peeking into someone else's life, I couldn't help but complain. The third prince actually hid his eyes because he feared the second prince, living like a complete fool. Seeing my strange expression, the little elephant attendant softly asked if I had any orders. I shook my head, saying let's go back. The little elephant attendant followed behind me, muttering that I was acting strange today, asking if I'd read night novels last night. He had no idea that the current me was no longer that timid, weak third prince. Walking along, I suddenly stopped. I asked the little elephant attendant how old I was now, because I clearly remembered the third prince would die on the eve of his coming-of-age ceremony. Some said he attempted to poison the queen consort but failed, then hanged himself out of fear of punishment, but no one believed it was true. And the current third prince was about to come of age, meaning only 1 or 2 months remained until death. I quickened my pace forward, the little elephant attendant behind me urgently calling for me to slow down. I didn't look back, only one thought remaining: I must survive and find a way to rewrite the war. I ordered the little elephant attendant to fetch scissors, firmly stating I wanted to make some changes. Though his face showed confusion, he still respectfully handed me the scissors. Realizing what I intended to do, the little elephant attendant frantically tried to stop me, saying the second prince would never tolerate such a change. I reassured the worried little elephant attendant, telling him not to worry. Then I picked up the scissors and cut away the long hair, hiding my red eyes without hesitation. The moment the scissors fell, everyone present gasped in shock. My crimson eyes were exposed without cover, showing a sharpness completely different from before. This appearance was my first step in breaking fate and fighting back. I turned to the little elephant attendant, firmly saying I'd handle it myself. No sooner had I spoken than the second prince suddenly appeared, his tone full of impatience and mockery, calling me crazy. The little elephant attendant was terrified, urgently asking what we should do. I watched the second prince approach, still using that insulting term blood eyes to address me. I took a deep breath, met his gaze, and corrected his terminology. The second prince froze for a moment, then as if enraged he shouted my name, then reached out and threw the knife by his side. Everyone was frightened, but I could see the knife was aimed at the little elephant attendant. I didn't hesitate for a second. I reached out and caught the blade firmly. The little elephant attendant turned pale with fright, crying out that my hand was badly injured. But the second prince casually made excuses that his hand just slipped. I endured the severe pain in my hand, a smile spreading across my face, slowly stood up and placed the knife back on his table, calmly telling him I was fine, in any respect. After returning to the lounge, the little elephant attendant still anxiously urged me to find a healer, but I just waved my hand, saying it was just a minor cut, no need to make such a fuss. I turned to look at the little elephant attendant, asking why he didn't dodge earlier. He clearly knew the attack was aimed at him, and with his abilities, he should have been able to avoid an attack of that level. The little elephant attendant stammered an explanation, saying if he dodged, who knows what excuse the second prince would use to make trouble for me. I sighed helplessly, joking about it being thanks to him, then stood up saying I was going to wash my face and calm down, instructing no one to come in. The little elephant attendant tried to follow to help. I quickly found something for him to do, telling him to clean up the table. Just moments ago, I'd instinctively wanted to attack the second prince with sword energy, but my heart suddenly sent a sharp pain. I had to recreate the situation just now, to confirm this body's condition. When I tried to channel magic power again, the stinging pain struck once more. Near my heart, I sensed 3 magic power circuits. I was shocked to discover the third prince was actually a mage. A few days later, the little elephant attendant looked at my still unhealed wound, nearly in tears with worry, but I could only reassure him it was fine. At that moment, the royal tailor came to pay respects. Upon seeing me, he lost his composure, murmuring about remembering the Grand Queen, then hurriedly apologized. Since cutting my hair, I'd encountered this reaction several times. It was getting tiresome. I knew in my heart that the third prince suffered long-term torment for resembling his mother he'd never met. He even hated seeing his own face, removing all mirrors from his room. I suppressed my annoyance, telling the tailor it was fine and to continue his work. While measuring, he couldn't help but urge me to eat more, saying I was so thin it made him worry, but I'd been eating properly all along. Looking at this thin figure in the mirror, I supposed it really would worry those around me. I suddenly remembered that Kyrus's royalty were descendants of dragons, specifically descendants of the 8 heroes who sealed the evil god. Among them, they were granted Kyrus royal family's exclusive blessing, including healing power and magical talent. By rights, My wound should have healed long ago, but there was no sign of improvement. Combined with the heart pain every time I used magic, I couldn't help but worry. If things continued like this, unable to use sword energy or magic, when assassins came for me, I could only wait to die. The tailor turned to fetch prepared clothes, mentioning they were suitable for the king's birthday. Hearing this, I suddenly remembered. The great mage would definitely attend the king's birthday. I had to meet him. The current him was one of the continent's rare 3/7 circle mages, an object of admiration for all mages. In the past, he'd been invited to Kaira's king's birthday feast, but was denied entry for unknown reasons. 10 years later, having missed the banquet, he became the continent's only 8th circle archmage, completely proving his abilities. Speaking of understanding magic power, no one could compare to him. He would surely help me solve this body's problem. Though I wasn't clear on the specific reason for his past rejection, Kairos wasn't particularly friendly to mages, and I didn't know if he'd accept my proposal. On this day, Kairos' palace was filled with knights, presumably under orders from the second prince's mother's family. To check their influence, I needed mage's power. If I could successfully win them over, perhaps I could prevent the future second prince from starting that war that destroyed my homeland. But before that, I had to solve the immediate problem. The tailor was currently enthusiastically discussing adding huge bows and ruffles to the clothes. I quickly and firmly refused, asking him, what would a prince look like wearing clothes full of ruffles? Days passed. I gradually adapted to life here. Seeing my hand was mostly healed, the little elephant attendant was overjoyed. He reported that day's schedule, with dinner with the poisonous queen in the evening. I pondered for a moment, thinking we'd have to meet eventually anyway, no need to be too resistant. The little elephant attendant asked if I'd still exercise today. I smiled and told him I was just running a few laps by the palace lake, told him not to worry so much, could anything really happen? But when I actually started running, I discovered. After just 3 laps, I was already gasping for breath, feeling like I might die. The short-haired maid rushed over with concern about my condition. She was the second daughter of the outer city guard knight commander, always carefully looking out for me. She told me I'd run 4.5 laps the first day, 4 laps the third day, but today I couldn't hold on after only 3. I knew this wasn't normal. Despite constantly exercising, my stamina kept declining. The short-haired maid suggested calling a healer to check, but I politely declined. I knew full well that once I called a healer, they'd quickly discover the magic circuits in my body, and the fact that the third prince was a mage was something even the little elephant attendant didn't know. Rash action would only endanger my life. I could only reassure her that declining stamina couldn't be helped by a healer. Things would get better after some time. Just then, the shouts of knight training came from not far away. It was already time for the Pavel Knights training. On the training ground, the knight commander strictly scolded students, telling them to focus, watch the blade, don't hesitate. That familiar scene reminded me of past days. I couldn't help but find it interesting, while the short-haired maid looked puzzled. She said I'd never been interested in swords and such before. At that moment, the knight commander noticed us too. While I casually brushed off the short-haired maid, he'd already walked up to us. They were ostensibly the royal knight order, but actually the poisonous queen's exclusive knights to check the king's power. I heard the knight commander's impatient tone ordering us to leave, saying we were disrupting the knight's training here. The short-haired maid rebuked his rudeness, announcing I was the third prince. At these words, the knight commander not only showed no respect, but became even more contemptuous. He even mockingly said he thought it was rats spying. Hearing such insolence, I was instantly furious. Was this deliberate harassment again? The short-haired maid angrily wanted to continue arguing, but the knight commander interrupted, pretending I wouldn't mind such a misunderstanding, but inwardly full of doubt, because he clearly remembered the past me, that extremely timid, disregarded third prince who would panic and apologize when standing in his way. Yet the terrifying aura emanating from me now left him somewhat at a loss. I walked straight up to the knight commander, seriously asking what his duties were. The knight commander broke out in cold sweat, trying to deflect with the excuse of busy training, telling me to mind my own business. The surrounding knights whispered among themselves. The short-haired maid stood by helplessly, while I persisted in questioning, repeating the same question. Everyone present was stunned. The knight commander had no choice but to answer reluctantly, saying his duty was to improve the royal knight's combat power and protect the kingdom and royal nobles. I nodded in agreement, then grabbed and snapped a nearby branch, bluntly stating he'd fulfilled none of these duties. I pointed out without courtesy, having just observed their training. It was an absolute mess. As soon as I finished speaking, I jumped up with the branch in hand, launching an attack. The knight commander broke out in cold sweat, thinking to himself if he didn't block this move, he might lose his life. He hastily drew his sword to block, but failed to cut through my branch. He stared trembling at the branch in my hand, unable to believe I could make him unable to see follow-up moves with just a branch. I smiled and released my grip. The knight commander's sword instantly flew out and stuck in the ground. I said plainly I'd never received professional training, yet he was so pathetic, truly disappointing. Then I changed tack, questioning how he dared despise me, a member of the royal family, if he claimed to protect royal nobles, even causing me injury before. What difference was that from rebellion? The knight commander was completely stunned. The me before him was like a different person from the third prince he knew. In the end, he could only kneel and beg for mercy, repeatedly claiming his thoughtlessness, absolutely no intention of rebellion. But inwardly, he seethed with resentment at this humiliation by the mere unpopular third prince. After leaving the training ground, I happily led a horse back to my quarters. The little elephant attendant was shocked when he saw it, asking how I'd ended up bringing back a horse when I went to exercise. The horse he mentioned, named Raven, I'd picked up on the way back. After dealing with the knight commander, I happened to see it. It was extremely hot-tempered, a fierce horse the second prince had tried and failed to tame. On a whim, I'd easily subdued it. The little elephant attendant jumped anxiously, saying how could I bring back the second prince's horse? But I didn't care. It had no owner now, naturally belonged to whoever found it. I instructed the short-haired maid to keep strict secrecy about what happened at the training ground. But before I could finish, my heart suddenly sent a sharp pain. It seemed at my current physical condition, the earlier actions were too much strain. The little elephant attendant worriedly came forward, but I just smiled, saying it had been a long time since I had such fun, then urged him to quickly prepare for dinner. Not far away, someone who'd been eavesdropping had already quietly left. The eavesdropper reported everything seen and heard to someone sitting and smelling flowers. That person laughed lightly after hearing, saying a person's birth cannot be changed, then snapped the flower in hand, laughing again, saying no matter how much he struggled it was useless. But this was good. If he were easily defeated, there'd be no fun in it. At the dinner gathering, I still couldn't adapt to this oppressive atmosphere, even though I had to endure it twice daily. The second prince across from me was in an especially foul mood, looking ready to explode at any moment. I thought to myself, could the poisonous queen and Viscount being late also be blamed on me? Watching him unable to control his expression, I thought he really wasn't mature enough yet. Then I caught a unique fragrance drifting over. My heart stirred. She's finally here. This country's real power holder, the poisonous queen. After the former queen died, she took over the queen's position. Then, using her family Brisson's power, she controlled the royal knights. Plus, with most noble support, her influence grew daily. And I, this powerless third prince, wasn't even taken seriously by the knight commander, much less by her. During the meal, the poisonous queen's brother, the Viscount, reported he'd appropriately give the knight commander some consolation money to handle the previous matter. The poisonous queen impatiently told him not to report such trivial matters to her anymore. Then the poisonous queen looked up at me, her gaze examining. I also looked up to meet her eyes, expression calm and unruffled. The dining hall atmosphere suddenly froze, full of subtle awkwardness. After a while, she called my name with false affection, sighing that she never expected I'd grown so much. Her reaction was within my expectations. I maintained composure while responding, but inwardly thinking the growth I'd bring in the future would be far more than this. The second prince raised his eyebrow mockingly, saying contemptuously that cutting my hair was just putting on airs. The first prince's gaze swept over coolly, expressionless, completely detached. The poisonous queen smiled in agreement, joking she'd almost failed to recognize me. The Viscount chimed in, saying I should have cut my hair short long ago, showing my face looked so much better. He also urged me to grow taller during this developmental period. Before he could finish, the poisonous queen softly called brother, and the Viscount immediately caught on, coughing and changing topics, saying he was hungry and urging food to be served. I laughed inwardly. As master of the Brisson merchant group, he really couldn't read the room, just like the rumors. At that moment, the poisonous queen turned to the second prince, questioning why he hadn't told her about his horse being uncontrollable. The second prince responded carelessly, saying that horse was useless to him. Keeping it just took up space. Bringing up such trivial matters was wasting time. As he spoke, he violently threw his utensils, standing up and saying he'd take his leave first. The poisonous queen bit her teeth in anger, but couldn't make him stay. 3 weeks later, it was finally the king's birthday. Inside and outside the palace was bustling, everyone careful not to make any mistakes. Guests arrived in endless streams, some exclaiming about seeing an elven delegation, some staring at the many gifts the delegation brought, sighing that this birthday banquet would surely be magnificent. Others speculating the princes must be busy preparing for the banquet, eagerly anticipating seeing them. Meanwhile, inside the palace, I was trying on the birthday formal wear. The tailor suddenly looked worried, asking if I'd been eating properly these days. Just as I was about to respond, blood suddenly started flowing from my nose and wouldn't stop. The little elephant attendant cried out in alarm, rushing up saying we should call someone to check, but I waved it off saying it wasn't serious, just hadn't been sleeping well, specifically showing the bleeding had stopped. But the tailor was extremely anxious, saying the problem wasn't nosebleeds, but that I'd gotten even thinner. I was somewhat surprised. How could this be? Had I been exercising too hard lately? But the truth was, though I'd been exercising diligently, my stamina kept declining. Every time I used magic, my heart still felt painful. Clearly, this body's heart had some problem. The tailor insisted I get checked, but I thought it unnecessary to make a big deal. If I found a healer, my identity as a mage would be exposed. The little elephant attendant suddenly spoke up, saying he saw me picking my nose yesterday, hinting my nosebleed was from this private habit. People around immediately whispered, discussing that I actually had such a habit. I was both angry and helpless. To help me cover up, he'd ruined my image. But thinking again, thanks to him, I could get away with it temporarily. After all, I'd told him myself about the body's problem, hoping he'd cleverly help cover it up going forward. The tailor, seeing this, stopped insisting I get checked, saying he'd modify the outfit according to instructions, though time was tight. The little elephant attendant quickly explained I had other arrangements before the event, still time to modify. Only then did the tailor relax, immediately taking the outfit to rush through it. After the tailor and others left, the little elephant attendant softly asked if today was the day to meet the great mage. I nodded silently. At this rate, news of my weakening body would eventually spread throughout the palace. So no matter what, tonight I had to meet the great mage and solve this body's problem. As we talked, the king's attendant came to notify that the king had urgent matters and canceled the usual prince's breakfast, changing to meeting us individually. I muttered inwardly, clearly busy, yet insisting on separate meetings. Wouldn't meeting everyone at once be more efficient? And I'd never imagined having a chance to meet His Majesty alone. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous. I followed the guide attendant straight to the king's study. Upon reaching the study, the attendant stepped aside, saying His Majesty has been waiting. Please enter. I gently pushed open the door and walked in. The moment I entered the king's study, the king of Kairos was looking down at documents. I bowed in greeting, but he acted as if he hadn't heard, still immersed in his own affairs, not looking up at me at all. Even though I knew nothing of Kairos etiquette, I knew how rude such behavior was. After quite a while, he finally looked up. Gesturing for me to come sit, I took the opportunity to congratulate him on his 38th birthday. He casually asked if I was doing well, saying I seemed to be doing fine. I touched my noticeably gaunt face, understanding. Currently, I was so obviously thin even palace servants could see it, yet the king noticed nothing. Only then did I understand. The real reason the king, despite being busy, insisted on meeting us separately. Meeting 3 sons at once required concentrating to talk with each one by one. Better to meet one at a time, saving considerable trouble. He couldn't bear to spend time time on his own sons. The more I thought about it, this family was completely fractured. Father only cared about government affairs, completely ignoring his sons. The first prince was indifferent to everything. The second prince was like a hooligan, I could still smell alcohol on him when I came in. And the second queen, as one of this country's actual power holders, even possessed power to ignore the king. In such a fragmented royal family, I knew clearly someone among them wanted to kill me. I clenched my fists thinking, come on, who will it be? The king's birthday celebration began. Surrounding guests whispered that I was completely different from before. Some glanced at the drunk second prince, couldn't help sighing he was drunk again. Everyone seemed to have the same feeling. Something was quietly changing, completely different from before. When the attendant loudly announced my entrance, I could feel all eyes in the hall focused on me. Those gazes held surprise, curiosity, and scrutiny. As the only prince who inherited the former queen's appearance, I'd cut away the bangs that always covered my eyes, exposing my red eyes, and deliberately wore a red brooch. I knew that in their eyes. This was perhaps my declaration of war, refusing to live submissively anymore. The little elephant attendant muttered beside me, not understanding why everyone was staring at me, naively thinking it was because the outfit looked too good, saying the tailor would be so happy to know. I looked at him helplessly, explaining everyone kept staring at me, because as third prince I was wearing too many gems. While chatting, I suddenly remembered the little elephant attendant mentioned before his family was also in Kyrus's capital. The little elephant attendant was somewhat surprised, saying I still remembered this. He explained his sister and father stayed in their homeland, other family lived in the capital. If they received invitations, they might come to the palace for the birthday celebration. I guessed he probably had things he didn't want others to know, so I didn't ask more. Instead, changing the topic, saying at this banquet, I had someone I wanted to meet. The little elephant attendant looked eager for gossip, thinking it was some beautiful lady. I asked if he knew why the dance hall was called Siegfried Hall. The little elephant attendant immediately nodded, explaining the hall's name came from Duke Siegfried family's first patriarch. He was one of the 8 heroes in the Two Gods War, and Siegfried was Kyrus's only Duke family. Though they possessed powerful strength, they held to a creed of protection, loyal to royalty for 500 years. I remembered the emotion I felt as Baron in my past life hearing this story, couldn't help but emphasize, telling the little elephant attendant. One person I wanted to meet was the Grand Elephant Duke. As soon as I spoke, hearty laughter came from not far away. It was Grand Elephant Duke himself. I schemed inwardly. Grand Elephant Duke, who'd held to his beliefs for years, was exactly the talent I needed. Why not test how sharp he was? I quietly released a bit of sword energy. Sure enough, he immediately sensed it. Grand Elephant Duke suddenly turned around, his gaze precisely locking onto me at the high place. I condensed my fingertips, silently retracting the leaked sword energy. The little elephant attendant whispered that Grand Elephant Duke seemed to have noticed me. I wasn't surprised inwardly. He was one of the continent's 5 sword masters. How could he not notice this subtle sword energy fluctuation? Though I was grateful for his sharpness, now wasn't the time to acknowledge each other. I could only pretend nothing happened and silently leave. The king's speech soon ended. He thanked everyone who gave blessings and invited everyone to enjoy the evening. Taking advantage of the lively scene, I led the little elephant attendant, quietly climbing rope from the window to leave the banquet hall. Raven was indeed a smart and gentle horse, already waiting at the agreed place. The little elephant attendant complained that when I wasn't around, Raven was quite violent, but I smiled and shook my head, saying Raven actually knew how to read situations. Truly very smart. We chatted and laughed, heading toward the main gate. Just approaching the gate, I heard guards arguing with someone. That person said he'd come from far away for the banquet, but the guard insisted without an invitation he couldn't enter. My heart stirred, eyes lighting up. Finally, the great mage has arrived. The guard insisted that even if he was a great mage, without an invitation he couldn't enter. The great mage's tone carried a hint of sarcasm, lamenting that Kyrus would judge guests who came from afar by their appearance. My heart tightened as I carefully observed his expression. The soldier judging by clothing alone was indeed improper, but the great mage's attitude rather seemed like deliberately seeking a reason not to enter the banquet. Seeing him turn to leave, I panicked. If I let him leave like this, I'd completely lose my chance to solve my physical problems. But His Majesty had already ordered that no one could leave during the banquet. In desperation, I instructed the little elephant attendant to stop the soldiers no matter what, then mounted my horse. With a low shout to Raven, I charged out. Behind me, guards shouted to stop, loudly ordering me to halt, and quickly arranged for horses, vowing to chase me down. I'd already galloped away, leaving the guards' shouts behind, while the little elephant attendant spun around anxiously on the spot, yet still remembered my instructions, trying to find ways to stop the soldiers. Just in this chaos, a steady voice suddenly rang out, telling the guards to stop, claiming Grand Elephant Duke would take responsibility for the third prince's outing. The guards looked confused, questioning who this person was to dare address the Duke by name. At that moment, the little elephant attendant revealed his true identity. He was actually Grand Elephant Duke's eldest son. Grand Elephant Duke appeared with a smile, joking he never expected his son to do such a thing, and brought up how the little elephant attendant had left home just to stay by the third prince's side. The little elephant attendant, both embarrassed and anxious, quickly interrupted his father, worried the king would investigate the relationship between the third prince and the Duke's family. But Grand Elephant Duke was quite confident, saying the king wouldn't inquire into this matter. He explained that the king was someone who thought far ahead. If the third prince merely happened to accept help from the Siegfried family, the king would be wary of this goodwill. But if we helped each other out of personal friendship, and the king didn't punish us, it would acknowledge the friendly relationship between the third prince and the Duke's family, and the Brisson family behind the poisonous queen would certainly make a big fuss about it. So no matter what the reason for the third prince leaving, the king would act as if nothing happened. After explaining, Grand Elephant Duke patted the little elephant attendant's shoulder, telling him to relax. On the other side, I rode Raven and caught up with the great mage. Seeing me chase after him, his face was full of surprise, asking why Kyrus's third prince would follow an old man like him. I dismounted and said directly that I'd heard 7th Circle archmages experience reverse aging, so I hadn't found the wrong person. I smiled and tried to keep him, saying it was still still early, he shouldn't go back just yet. I deliberately brought up his earlier action of tripping on the threshold, hinting that he clearly had an invitation but deliberately didn't bring it. He was deliberately finding fault. The great mage casually explained. He was just in a hurry to block the wind and overlook the dust on the threshold. I smiled, saying the king ordered that only invited guests could attend the banquet, never expecting the guards would really turn away the continent's top archmage. The great mage looked at me, stepped forward, saying not only did I not apologize, I even criticized him. Didn't know whether to call me frank or thick-skinned, but undeniably I was very interesting, especially those eyes, not like a 14-year-old child's. As he spoke, he reached out and grabbed my wrist. A sharp pain instantly transmitted from my heart. I could clearly feel his magic power flowing into my body. I never expected my physical condition would be discovered by him so quickly. I heard the great mage say softly, "Even closing the door cannot block all the wind." My heart jolted. He was right. I'd long since lost track of when. I could no longer use magic power normally, but the great mage's mind was full of doubt. He detected my magic power itself had no problem. The problem seemed to lie elsewhere. He knew well that Kairos, as descendants of dragons, had always neglected mages, even didn't take him seriously when he came of his own accord, already becoming the continent's laughingstock. Yet I, this prince despised by all and besieged on all sides, specifically chased out to keep him here. Was this really just coincidence? The great mage directly asked what I wanted from him. I knew in my heart that before a seventh circle archmage, any lie would be instantly exposed. So I dismounted and bowed solemnly, honestly saying I needed his help. Soon a strong windstorm betting my life would blow, so I came to ask him to save my life. The great mage didn't respond immediately, but cast an isolation spell on the spot to prevent eavesdropping. My eyes lit up, thinking without needing incantations he could deploy such exquisite magic. Was this the power of a seventh circle archmage? He looked at me, asking if I wanted to block this wind, or calm it. I pondered for a moment, answering to block it temporarily for now, but if later I needed the throne to achieve my goal, I'd also be willing to calm it. The great mage was internally shocked, never expecting I'd view the throne as merely a choice to achieve my goal. In his view, besides a body near death, I had almost nothing, yet possessed such firm conviction. He also said I resembled Sisvanian, found me particularly interesting, so he decided to see what cards I held. He told me to give him another invitation. I smiled lightly, knelt on one knee, solemnly becoming his disciple, extending an invitation. The great mage's eyes flashed with approval, responding he was willing to accept the prince's invitation. Meanwhile, at the palace, the little elephant attendant asked Grand Elephant Duke somewhat worriedly if people at the palace really didn't know his true identity. Grand Elephant Duke reassured him not to worry, saying he'd hidden it well. After all, if anyone knew he was from the Siegfried family, they'd never let him stay by the third prince's side. He also teased the little elephant attendant, saying although he was the duke's son, he completely lacked noble bearing. The little elephant attendant lowered his head, changing topics to ask about his sister's situation. Grand Elephant Duke told him his sister was guarding the family head position he'd abandoned, doing well. He also said if the little elephant attendant felt staying by the third prince's side wasn't as good as returning home as a young master, he could come back anytime. The little elephant attendant thought for a while, saying perhaps they'd meet in 3 months. Grand Elephant Duke suddenly dropped his joking expression, asking if he truly wanted to give up his family identity and stay by the third prince's side permanently. The little elephant attendant didn't answer directly, only repeating the prince would soon be 15. Grand Elephant Duke looked at him, slowly saying, the Siegfried family's nickname was Kairos' Grand Elephant. Elephants never covet positions that don't belong to them, but their strength is powerful. They're the king of beasts that even fierce animals dare not provoke. He said this only to let the little elephant attendant know how powerful the family behind him was, encouraging him to do whatever he wanted. No need to think so much. After speaking, Grand Elephant Duke suddenly hugged the little elephant attendant, so tightly it made him cry out in pain, repeatedly begging for mercy. After a long time, Grand Elephant Duke finally released his grip. The little elephant attendant, both angry and anxious, told Grand Elephant Duke to hurry up and go home. Grand Elephant Duke laughed heartily, agreeing to meet again later, saying he was a stubborn brat truly worthy of being a member of the Grand Elephant family. Watching the little elephant attendant's retreating figure, Grand Elephant Duke's thoughts drifted far. That little brat, when had he grown so much? Then he sighed, truly time spares no one. The next morning, the great mage's carriage had just arrived at the palace when the surrounding nobles exploded. Some stared intently at the carriage emblem, repeatedly confirming whether those were the 7 red flowers and silver staff representing the great mage. Some looked puzzled, secretly speculating why the great mage would suddenly visit when his contract with Kairos had ended. Others whispered that this was the great mage's natural choice, since he still had some friendship with the king. Still others mentioned that widely circulated rumor, curious whether what happened to the great mage's son was true. The great mage calmly descended from the carriage amidst the discussion, a slight smile on his lips, thinking his new disciple had done something quite adorable. Just last night, I'd instructed him to arrive at the palace punctually during morning meeting time, and must enter through the main gate. The great mage knew in his heart I probably wanted to use his power to check the queen consort's family influence. Deliberately bringing him before the nobles was nothing more than taking the opportunity to shake up the current situation. An attendant respectfully came forward to greet him, saying the king had been waiting. In the reception hall, the king looked at the great mage, inquiring about the purpose of his visit. The great mage candidly said he needed to find lodging in the palace. The king's heart stirred with waves, to check the poisonous queen. He'd always desired to win over influential figures like the great mage, never expecting the other party would take initiative. Really couldn't figure out his thoughts. The great mage smiled and explained, speaking of last night encountering a red-eyed black cat in the square, that cat was very clever. He liked it, so took it as a disciple, wanting to teach the disciple but lacking a place to stay. The king immediately understood the great mage's meaning, opening his mouth to ask what the great mage wanted to teach the black cat. The great mage said directly it was magic. He also added he didn't just want to teach magic, he wanted to create a suitable environment for the cat, the implication being he wanted to help the cat tidy up this home. The king hesitated, asking if he had the ability to bear the consequences. The great mage said since he'd taken a disciple, others couldn't do anything about it. Even if this restless master helped his majesty share his worries, they couldn't find fault. The king clenched his fists and stood up, agreeing to help the Great Mage arrange accommodations. The Great Mage thanked him, then complained that this home couldn't possibly get any worse anyway. The king changed tack, curious about his reason for helping. After all, in his view, the third prince had nothing special about him. The Great Mage raised an eyebrow at these words. Just based on the third prince's unusual physical condition, nothing about him was ordinary at all. The king continued, saying he'd only heard the third prince was timid and cowardly, never thinking he'd disregard rules to seek out the Great Mage on horseback. The Great Mage grew increasingly confused in his heart why the king only mentioned hearsay from start to finish. The king kept defending, saying if the third prince truly had something exceptional, he couldn't possibly have heard nothing. The Great Mage suddenly stood up, asking the king if he knew the prince's heights. The king indeed knew nothing, embarrassed for a long time, unable to say a word. The Great Mage continued, saying excessive concern sometimes becomes poison. Letting children be might help growth. But the king was just using busyness as an excuse. The king's expression darkened slightly, saying he'd understand the Great Mage's direct attitude out of concern as the third prince's master, but he still insisted he already loved the princes enough, especially the third prince, who was the apple of his eye. The Great Mage snapped his fingers, ending the conversation, telling the king to stop believing rumors, to carefully look at the truth before his eyes. The king was both shocked and angry, rebuking him for daring to cast magic freely in the palace. But the next second, the scene the Great Mage recreated left him frozen in place. The third prince's skin was blue-tinged, purple showing under his nails. His formal wear had obvious signs of hasty alterations. The clothes were custom-made a month ago, meaning his weight had dropped sharply during this time. He even experienced dizziness, needing to close his eyes to steady himself each time he stood. The king looked utterly shocked. The Great Mage's tone grew grave as he informed him. If he continued to ignore this, the king would ultimately lose everything. Meanwhile, at the third prince's palace, a maid worriedly told the little elephant attendant it was already noon. The third prince still hadn't gotten up for morning tea. The little elephant attendant reassured her with a few words, taking over and saying they'd let him drink it when he woke. He carried the morning tea into the bedroom, looking at the still sleeping third prince, thinking his highness must be tired from running around yesterday, sleeping so soundly. The little elephant attendant had just softly called your highness, when suddenly the Great Mage's voice came from behind, asking if the third prince was still asleep. The little elephant attendant was instantly scared out of his wits, nearly throwing the morning tea in his hands, saying outsiders weren't permitted to enter the third prince's bedroom without permission, questioning whether the Great Mage had used teleportation magic or something. The Great Mage calmly admitted he'd used teleportation magic, telling the little elephant attendant not to fuss over such trivial matters. The little elephant attendant feared disturbing the physically unwell prince, insisting the Great Mage leave first. But the Great Mage changed tack, teasing the elephant that just because he'd grown up and changed status, he thought he wouldn't be recognized. The little elephant attendant froze in place, failing to recognize the Great Mage. Remembering his father previously said he completely lacked noble bearing, no one would suspect, yet now, he was instantly seen through. Just then I slowly awoke, groggily calling for the little elephant attendant. The little elephant attendant hurriedly responded, stammering that a guest had come to visit. I rubbed my eyes, surprised to see who it was. The Great Mage walked to the bedside, handed me a small pouch, gesturing for me to accept it. I poured out the granular contents, full of doubt, speculating whether this was medicine for treatment. The Great Mage nodded, informing me my body currently had two problems. One was inability to use magic power, two was gradual weight loss. I was somewhat surprised. I'd never mentioned anything, yet Master could always see through my predicament at a glance. He mentioned I should have had Sisfanian's blessing. This power combined healing ability with magical affinity, yet the healing ability had mysteriously disappeared. From this he guessed my heart had a problem. The Great Mage asked me, didn't I think this combination was quite peculiar? He explained the blessing's essence was strengthening the heart. Magic power and life itself originated from the heart, and I hadn't lost the blessing, nor was my magic sealed. I urgently asked what the reason was. The Great Mage slowly spoke. It was due to human intervention. My pupils contracted sharply, a terrible thought emerging. My body couldn't help but tremble. Could someone have poisoned me? The Great Mage nodded, then said if not for the blessing sustaining me, I'd already be dead. The poison stressed my heart, healing ability reached its limit, plus my attempts to use magic triggered strong heart rejection. If I didn't take the antidote soon, certain death awaited. Looking at the pouch of antidote on the table, I thought darkly the original third prince was murdered. Before my rebirth he'd been poisoned for a long time. This was clearly a premeditated conspiracy, but there was one thing I found puzzling. If they poisoned him to death, why were they now rushing to eliminate this dying person? A murderous intent surged from my heart. The Great Mage sensed the abnormality, secretly shocked. This was definitely not killing intent a 14-year-old should possess. He was probably wondering who I really was, but now wasn't the best time to explain. I suppressed my anger, took out a pill. The Great Mage nodded, telling me to hurry and take it. I had a sudden thought, asking what would happen if I took poison and antidote simultaneously. The Great Mage looked puzzled, saying even with the antidote, continuing to ingest poison could at most provide 10 days of relief. I said that was enough. The Great Mage grew more confused, asking if I knew something. I determined the poison source was the daily morning tea, choosing to make me drink it in front of everyone. Both ensured I'd definitely ingest it and minimize the risk of the poisoning being discovered, since no one else drank it. Inwardly, I also speculated the original third prince might have noticed something wrong and perhaps refused the poisoned tea, which was why they couldn't wait to send assassins to kill him. The Great Mage agreed with my analysis but didn't understand why I wanted to keep it secret. After my rebirth, everything had changed. I couldn't guess what killing moves they'd use next, so before finding a complete solution, these matters must remain strictly confidential. I didn't say it aloud, but knew clearly clearly in my heart that once news spread, the little elephant attendant and others would definitely be dragged into trouble. I couldn't let them fall into danger because of me. Moreover, the villains dared to keep openly poisoning me like this, meaning they had absolute confidence they wouldn't be caught. The great mage seemed to read my thoughts, suddenly mentioning the little elephant attendant shouldn't have problems. Though I had doubts hearing this, I didn't ask further. The atmosphere eased slightly. The great mage turned to ask what I planned to do now. A memory of my father from my past life involuntarily surfaced in my mind. He once said, "To know the opponent's cards, you must first bet what you have." Never expected at a time like this, I'd recall his words. I steadied myself, making a request to Master, hoping tomorrow evening he could take me out of the palace. Soon it was the next day. Chaotic sounds came from the second prince's bedroom. Attendants anxiously urged the second prince to get up. The poisonous queen pulled back the bed curtains, her tone cold as she rebuked the second prince. It was far too late to prepare for afternoon events at this hour. Despite the alcohol ban, he still reeked of liquor. Why was he so obstinate? The second prince asked rudely what she was doing here, told her to leave after finishing. The poisonous queen ignored his rudeness, continuing that the third prince had taken a master, and that master was a seventh circle archmage. Now the nobles' minds were beginning to waver. The second prince asked indifferently what of it. The poisonous queen scolded him for being hopeless, telling him not to waste the effort she'd put into him, to get up immediately and prepare. This afternoon's event would have many attendees. At least today, she hoped he wouldn't disappoint her. After speaking, she turned and left the second prince's bedroom. The second prince was inflamed with rage, violently smashing the water glass in his hand. His foot was cut by shards and bleeding, but he paid no attention. He roared for everyone to get out. The third prince's face involuntarily surfaced in his mind. That anger intensified even more. During the afternoon event, outside the palace square was bustling with voices. Citizens loudly cheered, "Long live His Majesty," wishing him happy birthday, in unison shouting prosperity and glory to Kairos. Children excitedly pointed at the princes with praise. A little girl said excitedly, "The last one there was the third prince she most wanted to see." The little elephant attendant worriedly asked if my body was feeling better, saying my complexion today was much better than yesterday. I smiled in response, saying I'd rested well. Actually, I knew clearly it was because of taking the antidote. The little elephant attendant still couldn't relax, muttering that today's schedule was too packed. After the parade, there was also equestrian performance and a ball, so fully scheduled. What if I had another nosebleed? I teased him for worrying too much, but knew in my heart that being able to meet the citizens in good condition and let them see a different third prince was enough. Just then, I caught a suspicious figure from the corner of my eye. A memory from my past life instantly flashed through my mind. It was my dear friend, Reaver, who blocked a fatal blow for me and ultimately died before my eyes. How could he be in Kairos? This discovery made my heart tighten. Just as I was distracted, Raven beneath me suddenly became restless, stopping disobediently. I quickly tried to soothe it, telling it to move forward, but Raven remained agitated, stubbornly refusing to move. The little elephant attendant pulled the reins tight, barely settling it down somewhat. I stared hard at where Reaver was, my heart full of anxiety and doubt, but for now, I could only reach out to soothe Raven, silently thinking, "Monster, wait for me, I'll definitely come find you." After the parade ended, we arrived at the equestrian performance venue. Baron Pollen, master of the merchant group, respectfully welcomed us, saying it was his honor to host His Majesty and the princes, and expressed that he'd prepared a satisfying performance. Walking inside, I thought he was the one replacing the Brisson family to host the equestrian performance. Though drawn into pointless conflict because of this, it wasn't my concern anyway. Just then, a memory from my past life suddenly flashed through my mind. The first prince would be accidentally injured. The Baron would also be found guilty and ultimately sentenced to hanging. Coming back to myself, the Baron was currently enthusiastically directing everyone to the viewing platform, saying he'd prepared exclusive seats for each person. I followed his gesture, looking up, immediately spotting that precariously hanging chandelier overhead. That was it. In a moment, it would suddenly fall and strike the first prince. Thinking carefully, this was quite suspicious. This was an important occasion the king personally attended, yet no one checked for potential hazards, and the knights were standing by. Mentioning the knights reminded me of that annoying knight commander. A wave of disgust rose within me. Lost in thought, the Baron turned to invite me to my seat. I looked at the overhead chandelier, hesitated a moment, then spoke up after all, saying that thing overhead made me uneasy, suggesting he go inspect it. The Baron froze for a moment, following my gaze up to the chandelier. Soon, the equestrian performance officially began. The program was spectacular, drawing applause throughout the venue. The Baron sat beside the king, his heart full of excitement and relief. He never imagined he'd receive the honor of sitting alongside His Majesty in this lifetime. Seemed all the careful preparation during this time was worthwhile. He unconsciously looked toward me. Suddenly remembering my earlier reminder, his heart skipped a beat. Had he really carefully inspected the lighting fixtures before? When he went to check just now, he'd broken out in cold sweat. The chandelier's connection point was already loose. The supporting rope had been cut. If this lamp fell, it would definitely injure the first prince. His fate would be unthinkable. Then, yet one question kept nagging at him. How did the third prince foresee this? At that moment, I met his gaze, a barely perceptible smile crossing my lips. He'd just been willing to give up the chance to get close to the king to check for hazards. That judgment was truly rare, able to quickly weigh pros and cons, not just focused on immediate benefits, knowing to look ahead. Exactly the kind of talent I needed. Since he already owed me a life-saving debt, I could conveniently bring him under my wing later. Then I turned my gaze to the second prince beside me, shaking my head inwardly. He truly had no self-awareness at all. The performance had reached its climax. The host loudly maintained order, calling for everyone to stay quiet, announcing next was the equestrian team's pride. But as soon as as he finished speaking, the second prince's cursing suddenly rang out, saying my veins flowed with filthy and lowly blood. The first prince's expression instantly darkened, sternly cutting him off. I sneered inwardly, though. I didn't know what this guy was suddenly raving about. This outburst actually helped me tremendously. Not far away, the king's eyes flickered, as if wanting to see how long I'd endure. The poisonous queen bit her teeth at the side, clearly never expecting the second prince would be so impulsive. She clearly warned him to be careful. She must be filled with anger and helplessness at this moment. Probably also realizing the second prince did it deliberately, just didn't understand why he had to do it at today's critical occasion. Surrounding nobles whispered among themselves. Some shocked the second prince dared say such treasonous words before the king, feeling they couldn't keep supporting him. They began to waver, thinking with the great mage's protection, I might also be qualified to become crown prince, feeling they couldn't just keep watching. It was time to make a choice. The performance soon ended. Thanks to my reminder, the first prince avoided disaster. Yet the king made no response to the second prince's terrible words. Though this was the situation I hoped for, I still had doubts. If this incident was truly orchestrated by the poisonous queen, she was far too calm at this moment. Could it be she actually knew nothing about this? My thoughts suddenly drifted, as if conversing with my father from my past life. Father asked if I thought this incident in Kairos was merely a terrorist attack on royalty. Besides attempting to harm princes, were there other deeper reasons? My brother's voice also surfaced, asking if I knew how much money could be obtained, laughing that he hadn't forgotten those accounts I'd recorded. I suddenly understood. If they eliminated the master of Kairos' second largest merchant group, who would gain the most benefit was undoubtedly the viscount who owned the largest group, the poisonous queen's brother. Snapping back to reality, I immediately asked the little elephant attendant what important industries Baron Pollen had. The little elephant attendant thought for a moment, answering the Baron was most famous for diamond mines. I was certain in my heart, that's right, as long as the Baron disappeared, control of diamonds would be completely seized by the Brisson merchant group. That viscount fellow really knew how to play tricks. I immediately spoke, telling the little elephant attendant to help me cancel all remaining events. The little elephant attendant was shocked, hastily trying to dissuade me, saying the upcoming ball would be attended by most nobles. Canceling really wasn't appropriate. I deliberately acted disappointed, explaining it might be because of the earlier insults that deeply affected me. I probably couldn't attend the ball. At the palace, the king sat alone in contemplation, wondering what had happened during this time. The great mage's earlier warning, the poisonous queen's actions, the second prince's insults, and his beloved grand queen's deathbed entreaty, urging him to take good care of their son. Just then, a servant hurriedly reported, saying the queen consort had arrived. As soon as the words fell, the poisonous queen walked into the hall. A maid nearby saw this, quickly stood up saying she'd prepare fresh tea. The poisonous queen's gaze swept around, puzzled, asking why she hadn't heard of any guests. The king responded coolly, saying no need to prepare, the guest would leave soon, then directly asked what she wanted. Looking at the king's demeanor, the poisonous queen restrained some of her edge, suggesting they let the Brisson family apologize on behalf of what happened today. The king thought inwardly, never expecting the second prince's outburst would dampen the poisonous queen's arrogance. Seemed at this stage, stabilizing the second prince's position was most important to her. The poisonous queen continued, saying today's performance left a deep impression, suggesting they give the baron who hosted it some reward. The king's eyes moved slightly, asking back if she had her own ideas about this suggestion. The poisonous queen immediately responded, suggesting they grant the baron the royal horse and equipment supply rights held by Brisson. The king was greatly shocked inside, never expecting she'd be willing to give up such an easy moneymaker. This reminded him of the great mage's earlier advice. The great mage had said this incident wouldn't make the poisonous queen give up the royal knights, because things hadn't reached the point where she needed to let go. If only to make up for the second prince's outburst, this sacrifice was too great for her, but she'd still pay an appropriate price. So the king should pretend not to know this time and watch how things develop. After pondering, the king decided, have the second prince enter the ball with him tonight. The poisonous queen immediately smiled, responding that the second prince would be very happy. On the evening of the ball, the king and second prince entered the banquet hall together, and the baron was granted the royal horse and equipment supply rights. Everyone understood this was a deal between the king and poisonous queen to smooth over the second prince's outburst scandal. The Brisson family's willingness to bear this loss was enough to prove the second prince's words weren't just an outburst, meaning I'd been elevated to someone the poisonous queen needed to guard against seriously. Back at my palace, looking at the room full of gifts, the little elephant attendant asked how I planned to handle them. I responded coolly that while striking down the second prince and poisonous queen was good, I didn't need these fence-sitters' gifts. I instructed the little elephant attendant to return everything except gifts from the Mage Association and the Baron. The little elephant attendant began checking gift senders one by one, soon picking up a box saying it was from the Baron. I was somewhat curious what he'd sent. Opening it, I found a sparkling gemstone necklace. Looking closer, I discovered it was actually a necklace for horses to wear. I turned to look at the little elephant attendant. What had he told the Baron? The little elephant attendant looked somewhat embarrassed, explaining the Baron asked what I liked, so he told him I greatly valued Raven. But I quickly figured it out. This was the Baron testing me. If I accepted this gift, his next move should be sending another generous gift to thank me for saving his life. But that wasn't my purpose, so I told the little elephant attendant to calculate the necklace's price and send it to Pollen Merchant Group to buy it. The little elephant attendant pointed to a corner, saying the Mage Association's gift was a very special potted flower. Following his gesture, I couldn't help complaining about those mages' taste. Really couldn't understand why they'd send such a bizarre flower. The little elephant attendant flipped to the instruction manual, telling me this flower turned into fluorescent pollen when it died. He then asked if I wanted to send it back to the association. I shook my head, saying no need, already having an interesting idea in mind. Before long, I deliberately knocked over the morning tea on the table. The maid saw this and hurried over, asking worriedly if I'd been scalded. I smiled, saying it was fine, my hand just slipped. Just regrettable Meanwhile, all this good tea was spilled everywhere. The little elephant attendant quickly called people over to clean up, asking somewhat worriedly if anything would happen since this was a flower pot the great mage sent. I firmly responded it was fine, deliberately adding that there was no poison in the morning tea anyway. Just leave the pot there. After all, I quite liked that flower. As night fell, the great mage came as agreed, quietly taking me out of the palace. I thanked him for taking time from his busy schedule to help. The great mage smiled in response, saying this wasn't difficult. He looked at me, saying I seemed much happier than in the palace. I nodded honestly, saying of course I was happy, nearly letting slip this was my first time freely going out. The great mage asked if this precious outing really had the king's permission. I vaguely responded, saying someone should be reporting to him by now. The great mage laughed heartily, saying he knew it would be like this, then looked at me approvingly, saying truly worthy of being his disciple. I quickly asked if this was praise. The great mage caringly asked if I'd been taking the medicine on time. I nodded, saying of course, I took it today too. Thanks to him my body felt much lighter, adding that the person poisoning the tea was now so anxious their foxtail was showing. I'd already planted interesting seeds that were slowly taking root. The great mage joked that with such an excellent disciple, he didn't even have a chance to act. I quickly denied it, saying how could I not need master's help? The gift he sent played a huge role. The great mage stopped teasing, saying seriously it was time to say goodbye. Since I insisted on going alone, he couldn't stop me. I thanked him again for his understanding. The great mage told me there was a mage association on Tenon Gorge Street. He'd be waiting there, told me to come find him after handling things. I respectfully responded, saying, see you later, master. After bidding farewell to the great mage, I first went to a blacksmith shop and ordered a specially commissioned sword, thinking before the new sword was forged, I'd temporarily use a knife for emergencies. Right now, what I needed most was intelligence. I couldn't help recalling my past life. My homeland secretly investigated various countries, dispatching large numbers of spies to continents everywhere to gather intelligence. Those spies weren't just intelligence agents, but top assassins managed long-term by the state. They were created by my father, the king of Seclidia, and my past self together, so I knew better than anyone how dangerous and ruthless they were. Following the address in my memory, I arrived at a carrier pigeon rental shop in that area. My current identity was Kyrus's third prince, once discovered. Those people definitely wouldn't spare me. Plus, with my black hair and red eyes, I was far too conspicuous, had to stay as low-key as possible. Reaching the shop entrance, I pushed open the door and walked in. I found the actual interior space was much larger than it looked. Walking to the counter, I saw the shop owner. The owner asked if I wanted to rent carrier pigeons. I shook my head, my gaze sweeping over those drowsy pigeons in the shop, softly saying these birds really couldn't wake up, looked quite sleepy. The owner nodded in response, saying they were indeed very sleepy. I continued, saying they looked exhausted, must have flown back from far away. The owner nodded again, admitting this was true. I followed up, saying there shouldn't be any other place like this where exhausted birds could rest well. The owner's eyes instantly became alert, asking gravely what I was looking for. I gave the agreed code word, responding I came to find bird feed. The owner froze, saying he did indeed sell bird feed here, but he changed tack, suddenly attacking, saying he didn't remember selling birds to anyone recently. Facing the owner's challenge, I knew full well that with the third prince's weak body, direct confrontation was not the best strategy. I followed the code word to respond, clarifying the bird had just left the nest to find food, naturally wasn't sold from here. In the spy code system I'd established, bird meant spy, feed meant intelligence. Even among compatriots, identities had to be completely secret. This was an iron rule to prevent one person's capture from implicating everyone. The owner asked whose bird I was. I didn't directly report my father's name, though even if I did, no one would see through it, but I chose the agreed code name, responding I was Neverod's bird. Hearing this, the owner stopped testing and gestured for me to follow him. I knew he'd lowered his guard. I was about to become the first prince in Kyrus to use Seclidia spies to obtain local intelligence. I made my request hoping to feed the bird that had just left the nest, meaning obtain the needed intelligence and items. The owner nodded, leading me into the space hidden behind the shop, introducing himself with the codename White Eagle, then asking how to address me. I gave the codename I'd already thought of, Red Swan. After entering the innermost study, White Eagle directly quoted a deposit of 8 florins. I couldn't help being wary. Shouldn't he first see what I wanted specifically, then quote a price? But he explained this was the rule for custom service. I took out the appropriate deposit and gave it to him. He then produced the items and intelligence I'd requested. I accepted the items, examined them to confirm, then thanked him and stood to leave. Reaching the door, White Eagle suddenly called out to stop me. He smiled, saying, this trip carried considerable risk and reminded me to be careful. I appeared to accept his words, but inwardly sneered. No matter how dangerous, it wouldn't be more dangerous than this veteran spy. Leaving the carrier pigeon shop, night had fallen. I tried to keep a low profile heading to the Mage Association. According to the map, I had to cross a bridge, but as I approached the bridge, I was stopped. Nearly thought I'd been exposed, but the person explained the deceased was about to embark on the final journey. If it wasn't urgent, hoped I could wait a moment. I suddenly understood. This was Kyrus's farewell ceremony, so I nodded, saying I was willing to wait. I watched the red flower petals floating on the river surface, recalling Kyrus's custom. Legend had it that if a living person crossed the bridge at this time, the deceased would become lost. This reminded me of my homeland Seclidia ceremony. We'd place Sanasta flowers on graves, white flowers withering by day, blue second blooms opening at night, symbolizing the farewell where the living and dead could never meet again. A hint of melancholy rose in my heart. After my death in the past life, was a Sanasta flower also placed on my grave? Or before that, had the axis of time already turned? Perhaps, like those lost deceased, I was trapped in a time that didn't belong to me. After waiting a moment, the person thanked me, indicating I could continue my journey. I turned back to Raven's side, mounted the horse, softly saying the deceased would depart peacefully. I too would pray for the departed, then galloped away. But that person's face, which had remained concealed, made a memory of the blue mage suddenly surface in my mind. Back then, the blue mage wore an evil smile, launching magical attacks at me, completely defeating me, completely different from this gentle demeanor. Perhaps in this life, the fate between us could also change. Arriving near the destination, I looked at the signs along the way, couldn't help clicking my tongue. This was too exaggerated, just like the rumors I'd heard from spies as Baron. Cairus's capital was essentially a gathering place for Sisfanian followers, with related markings visible everywhere. Walking into the target building, a clerk enthusiastically came forward wanting to lead me to a seat. I told him I wasn't here to drink or eat, directly stating I wanted to go to the 4th floor. The clerk's face flashed with surprise, then respectfully acknowledged, saying he'd guide me right away, wishing me a pleasant time. I glanced at him, understanding inwardly. This building clearly only had 2 floors, yet the code specified the 4th floor. Obviously, the 4th floor wasn't upstairs but underground, hiding another secret space. What I sought wasn't the 3rd floor's small-stakes poker gambling halls, but the illegal fighting arena hidden beneath, deeper down. This was the core intelligence I'd requested from White Eagle. After entering the room, I turned the secret switch on the wall. The hidden door behind the bookshelf opened in response. A passage leading underground slowly appeared. I descended the stairs. Piercing roars and thick scent of blood assailed me, truly nauseating. Brutal fighting was taking place in the arena. The audience roared madly, urging fighters to deliver killing blows. The referee announced the victor, called the Blood Fist fighter. Those who won their bets rushed excitedly to collect their winnings. Those who lost their bets were furious, rushing forward wanting to kill the fighter. The entire scene was filled with humanity-destroying madness. As I observed, someone came forward demanding an entrance fee. To obtain the intelligence I needed, I had to first follow this place's rules. I immediately paid the entrance fee. Someone gestured for me to follow a girl. She was a sweet-looking, white-haired girl, but throughout she only communicated with me through body language. I looked at her puzzled, observing carefully, horrified to discover one of her ears had been cut off. The revealing clothes she wore were definitely not voluntary. Even more alarming, every girl wore an escape prevention tracking device around her neck, sending a chill through my heart. The white-haired girl poked me, then pointed to the betting table. I immediately understood she was indicating I should place bets. I pulled out 2 gold coins from my chest, placed them directly on the tray in her hand. The rules here were simple and brutal. Just bet money and watch fights. Win bets and you double your money if you kept betting. Consecutive wins could accumulate high profits. Eventually my table was piled with countless gold coins, but my purpose for this trip was definitely not to make money, rather to find someone. Match after match concluded. Finally, someone announced the last special match was beginning. The referee loudly called out one fighter was Bloodhammer, the other was Reaver, who'd never won but didn't know how to give up. I suddenly stood up, my gaze locked dead on the arena entrance, thinking, he's here. My thoughts were instantly pulled back to my past life. Memories of Reaver flooded my mind. I remembered Reaver once said he was captured and taken to a fight gambling arena. To save his sister, he was forced to grit his teeth and persevere, but in the end his sister died. I rescued him from that desperate situation, so he was willing to be the sword in my hand, protecting me for life. I didn't hesitate for a second, placing all my previously won chips on Reaver. The white-haired girl beside me was instantly stunned, clearly never expecting I'd make such a decision. Discussions rose and fell around me, all saying this little brat definitely didn't know how to play. It was pure luck that won the money. Others cursed me as a lunatic. I knew full well, Reaver's current win rate was 0. No one believed he could gain revenge in today's revenge match. A kind person couldn't stand it. Came over to advise me not to waste such a large sum, suggesting I bet on someone else. I ignored his advice, turning to ask the girl if she'd confirmed the chips. Emphasizing again all my chips were on Reaver, told her to check carefully. That person kept muttering, saying he was thinking of me out of kindness. If I didn't listen, I'd definitely lose everything. He had no idea how terrifying Reaver was, much less where my confidence in him came from. The arena-side audience grew increasingly frenzied. The referee announced again the prize money for this match had multiplied tenfold. Someone loudly shouted for Bloodhammer to kill Reaver today, teach this arrogant little brat a lesson. In their eyes, I was a new gambler whose head was turned by money. Bloodhammer was a ruthless character who'd fought across underground arenas. His iron fists left no survivors. That Reaver was purely a punching bag, saying I'd bet on him guaranteed losing everything in one match. As the referee's whistle sounded, announcing today's main event officially began. Bloodhammer launched a fierce attack first. Reaver hastily raised his arms to block. Bloodhammer smoothly dropped his shoulder and swung his fist, landing squarely on Reaver's right shoulder. Reaver staggered from the force, completely unable to defend. Bloodhammer borrowed momentum to spin and sweep his leg. One heavy kick brutally struck his side, directly kicking Reaver to the ground. At that moment, arena-side audience roared provocatively. The ear-piercing shouts of "Kill Reaver" rose and fell. I watched Reaver in the arena with no ability to fight back, my heart anxious beyond measure. Thinking Reaver now had no sword, under Bloodhammer's fierce attacks he had no way to resist. Inside the arena, Bloodhammer attacked while grinning mockingly, cursing Reaver for being slow as death, spitting that he was a stubborn brat tough as a cockroach. Then swinging his fist-sized fist, one heavy blow slammed hard into Reaver's chest. Reaver suddenly coughed up blood. Bloodhammer pressed his advantage relentlessly, swinging fists continuously, after dense heavy punches landed on him. The final blow struck toward his head, wanting to finish him. Just as Reaver was about to be completely crushed, I could no longer hold back, suddenly standing and shouting loudly, reminding him not to let Bloodhammer aim at his shoulder before attacking. Hearing my shout, Reaver froze. Then, as if suddenly enlightened, his form became agile, continuously dodging Bloodhammer's fierce attacks. He slowly clenched his fists, a fierce look flashing in his eyes, preparing to counterattack. My heart leaped with joy. That's right, just like that. Before long, Reaver keenly caught Bloodhammer's opening when punching. Taking advantage, he thrust a straight punch, then sank his waist to gather strength, launching an uppercut toward his chin, immediately turning his wrist to exchange fists, a hook punch slammed hard into Bloodhammer's face, directly sending Bloodhammer crashing to the ground. The entire venue instantly fell into dead silence. The white-haired girl beside me also looked stunned. Immediately after, the scene erupted with disbelieving exclamations. No one expected the repeatedly defeated Reaver would actually defeat the perpetual winner Bloodhammer, winning his first victory in his fighting career. Reaver in the arena slowly raised his head, meeting my distant gaze. The confusion in his eyes faded, filled with scrutiny. I grinned, giving him a friendly smile, conveying encouragement. Just then, a voice came from behind, saying the big boss wanted to meet me. I turned to see a burly man. Arriving backstage, the gold-toothed boss looked me up and down, his tone carrying greed, saying my skills were impressive, actually using 3 florins to win 6,000 florins. But he wasn't comfortable handing over such a large sum to a brat like me. I responded coolly, provocatively saying I thought he'd at least try to negotiate. Seemed he was more foolish than I thought. The gold-toothed boss was enraged by my attitude, rebuking me for being so arrogant as a little brat, ordering me to take off my cloak and show my face. I coldly reminded him if I removed my cloak, they might get in big trouble. The gold-toothed boss clearly didn't believe me, ordering his men to come hold me down, also telling them to quickly reveal my noble countenance, to see how impressive I was that I had to hide like this. I stopped wasting words, directly drawing my blade. The sharp edge instantly pierced through his subordinate's hand. That subordinate screamed in agony. The gold-toothed boss cursed inwardly, actually ran into this kind of lunatic who casually wielded blades. He frantically begged for mercy, saying coming up with 6,000 florins at once was difficult, hoping I'd give him some time. I shook my head, saying the money wasn't necessary, but they had to hand over Reaver to me. The gold-toothed boss looked troubled, saying Reaver had just started making money. The boss would never agree. Inwardly, he ranted furiously if he did as I said, he might not even keep his head. But thinking again, no matter how skilled I was with swords, I was still alone. They had numerical advantage, so he steeled himself to refuse. Hearing this, I directly released fierce sword energy, swinging my blade to split the solid wood table before the gold-toothed boss. The gold-toothed boss was scared out of his wits, falling on his rear. I demanded sternly, if I said I'd take both 6,000 florins in his life, would you consider accepting my request? The gold-toothed boss's face turned deathly pale, trembling like a sieve, then frantically roared for his men to bring Reaver immediately. I frowned inwardly, my heart was starting to hurt again. This kind of sword energy usage couldn't be done a second time, this body simply couldn't handle it, had to end everything now. Just then, a lackey ran back in panic, reporting things had changed. He reported to the gold-toothed boss that Reaver kid stubbornly refused, saying he couldn't abandon his sister. My heart stirred, suddenly remembering Reaver once said his sister chose suicide back then, after which he left the fighting arena. He'd always suffered for failing to protect her to the end. At this timeline, Reaver's sister hadn't died. That was so good. I threatened, saying no matter how many people, bring them immediately or face the consequences. Then I added to bring them myself. The gold-toothed boss quickly agreed, guaranteeing he'd handle it. Before that, I held out my hand gesturing, telling them to return both my entrance fee and betting principal, after successfully bringing Reaver and his sister out of the fighting arena. The siblings were both very nervous. Reaver spoke first, his tone full of gratitude thanking me, but couldn't help wondering, asking why I would help them. I smiled reassuringly, telling them not to be so tense, I meant them no harm. Speaking, I took off my cloak and draped it over Reaver's sister. Reaver saw my appearance clearly, his pupils contracted sharply, his face full of shock. The next second, he quickly bowed in salute, saying guiltily he had eyes but couldn't see, actually dared to doubt me, a prince. I gently waved my hand, telling him not to lower his head, no need to be so respectful to me. Looking at these two half-elf siblings with nothing, I knew full well how hard their past days had been. I recalled the conversation from my past life, asking Reaver again. When fighting, he exposed his shoulder. That was a common habit for novices practicing swordplay. Could it be he wanted to become a knight? Reaver was silent for a moment, shaking his head, saying he didn't want to become a knight, but rather wanted to become a sword that could protect everything. Hearing the exact same answer as my past life, I couldn't help but smile. I tossed him the sword I'd prepared long ago, seriously telling him, if he was willing to be my sword, come find me. Reaver looked confused, puzzled, asking why I treated them so well. I looked at him, calmly saying because I needed a good sword, but inwardly responding, my dear friend, because this is the best way I can repay you. Then I rode to find the Mage Association, stepping into the Great Mage's office in the Mage Guild. I happened to catch the Great Mage burning a piece of paper until he'd completely burned the paper clean. Hearing his low muttering, I spoke up at the right moment, telling him I'd arrived. The Great Mage turned to see me, immediately noticing the disheveled clothes I wore, puzzled, asking if I'd gotten in a fight, how my clothes ended up like this. I downplayed it, responding I hadn't fought with anyone, just experienced many twists and turns handling things today. Everything went smoothly according to plan, but somehow I felt a hint of unease. Was it because I'd done too much in a short time? The Great Mage gazed at me for a moment, lightly flicked his fingers. The teapot on the table automatically began brewing tea. I watched this scene, smiling, saying this place finally had some magical feeling. The Great Mage teased me, asking if I expected to see thunder striking down, light and shadow transforming, that kind of scene. I couldn't help laughing aloud, admitting I did have such thoughts. I looked down at the table again. That short blade was identical to the one I'd bought earlier. I was about to ask the Great Mage what was going on, but the Great Mage asked first, asking why I thought this sword was here. Before I could respond, the short sword suddenly flew up, shooting straight toward my chest. My heart jumped. Oh no, too late to dodge. The Great Mage looked at me, his tone calm, saying, even with a weak body, my reactions were still quick. He explained this was a type of magical artifact that could replicate weapons the other party had hidden, a method of warning the opponent. I clutched my chest wound, instantly understanding the Great Mage never intended to attack me from the start. I'd been too hasty, instinctively using sword energy just now, which was sensed by the artifact. The Great Mage indeed detected the abnormality, saying a person who couldn't even use a sword could actually employ sword energy. He also mentioned the first day we met, he felt our encounter was very peculiar. Just didn't think much of it then, but later more and more strange things happened. The king said I was afraid of horses. Noble said I seemed like a different person. When I learned I'd been poisoned, I showed not fear of death but killing intent only possessed by those whose hands were stained with much blood. And I knew in advance about the accident at the equestrian performance and successfully prevented it. it. The great mage gazed at me, requesting I tell him everything. My heart jolted. He clearly harbored doubts about me, yet didn't choose to test or interrogate, instead was trying to trust me. I clenched my fists, finally deciding to reveal everything. I told the great mage I wasn't Kallian, my real name was Baron Seclidia. Then I recounted my rebirth experience, the war from my past life, and the secret of the axis of time. After hearing everything, the great mage thoughtfully murmured, so it was the axis of time. Then everything made sense. He then asked, was the original third prince already dead? I shook my head, saying I could still feel his presence, he should still be alive. The great mage recalled I'd said before what I wanted wasn't the throne, so he asked again what I truly wanted. I was silent for a moment, solemnly answering I wanted to stop the war. Still wasn't clear on the second prince's reason for wanting the axis of time. If the problem's root wasn't resolved, history would repeat itself, so I had to find out the cause. The great mage suddenly changed tack, asking if I wanted to stop the war. Was it for myself or for Baron's brother Chase? I looked utterly confused, asking what this meant. The great mage informed me of something that shattered my understanding. Currently, Seclidia only had one prince, which was Chase. The queen had no other offspring, and this person Baron didn't exist in this world at all. I was struck like lightning. Too shocked to speak, I didn't exist in this world, not in Seclidia, nor anywhere on this land. Could it be because the axis of time reversed, causing space-time distortion, that I entered Kallian's body, but I thought perhaps someone also entered my body, only now realizing, as long as I was here, another Baron couldn't possibly exist. I'd essentially stolen someone else's life. The great mage looked at me and continued, saying the current Chase had already secured his position as Seclidia's crown prince. Just as I knew, past and present had changed, the future might already be heading toward a different situation. So as Kairos' third prince, constantly in danger, I didn't need to worry about that outstanding Seclidia crown prince. I instantly understood the great mage's intent. He wanted me to stop living bound by the past. I looked at the great mage, firmly saying I understood. What he worried about wouldn't happen. Also frankly saying from the first day I opened my eyes in Kairos, I'd already given up on the notion of living as Baron. The great mage clearly didn't expect I'd be so resolute. His face showed shocked expression. I gathered courage to ask, even if I wasn't the real Kairos prince, could he still accept me? The great mage suddenly laughed, then solemnly told me, the person who formed a master-disciple bond with him from the start was only me. On the road back to the palace, we two rode horses. I couldn't help asking the great mage if he already knew about the axis of time's existence. Seeing his reaction just now, seemed he'd heard this name before, didn't know what else he knew. The great mage pondered, saying about this time last year, Chase had asked him about the axis of time. He secretly went to Seclidia once, but only found out the axis of time wasn't made by humans, learned nothing else. A month ago, he received news the axis of time had disappeared from Seclidia, and I happened to return to 10 years ago a month ago, my mind filled with doubts. As I returned to the past, the axis of time also disappeared. Was this coincidence or inevitability? Why was I reborn? Where did the axis of time go? The great mage interrupted my thoughts, saying even thinking about these now wouldn't find answers. But we could ask a certain learned person, and I'd meet her soon. That person was Sisfanian. I suddenly remembered my coming-of-age ceremony was about to arrive. Kairos princess's coming-of-age ceremony was called Rosalita, going to Sisfanian's cave to perform the ritual announcing becoming true royalty. There, one could see Sisfanian's oracle. The great mage instructed me that to smoothly hold the coming-of-age ceremony, I had to first find a way to survive, so I must quickly resolve the poisoned morning tea matter. I confidently responded, the seeds I'd planted should have sprouted. Back at the palace, the little elephant attendant was already anxiously waiting at the door. Seeing me, he immediately came forward, complaining I returned too late, made him worry terribly. I ignored his complaints, going straight to the window to check that special potted flower. As expected, the traces on the leaves confirmed my speculation. The little elephant attendant still muttered beside me, saying if I wanted to sleep, I should wash up first. I interrupted him, smiling, saying I'd show him something cool. The little elephant attendant looked puzzled, following me to the balcony, couldn't help complaining the weather at night was cold, didn't understand why I suddenly wanted to come here, because the potted flower received from the Great Mages Guild had extremely special properties. After it died, it would turn into fluorescent pollen and spread. Earlier, I deliberately pretended to slip in front of everyone, pouring that cup of poisoned morning tea into the pot, secretly observing the reactions of the servants around me. If a mortal touched this poison, they couldn't last even a day. If a plant absorbed the poisoned tea, naturally it couldn't survive either. But surprisingly, that potted flower didn't wither, instead remained vibrant, just like someone had switched it. The little elephant attendant leaned forward, looking at the expanse of blooming fluorescent pollen below, couldn't help exclaiming how beautiful. I already had my answer in my heart, even if the switch succeeded without being discovered. There was no way to casually discard the poisoned dead flower, had to keep it in the safest place, and that dead potted flower would ultimately lead me to catch the real culprit, the master of Hessia Palace, the poisonous queen. The next morning, the sky suddenly began drizzling. I stood quietly by the window, faintly hearing movement outside the door. I turned to actively greet the entering little elephant attendant. He didn't expect I'd wake so early today, saying in the past it was always him waking me up. Now that I woke myself, he felt somewhat unaccustomed. I told him I slept well last night and woke at dawn. The little elephant attendant joked it was truly rare, the sun would rise from the west. Speaking, he handed over the morning tea. I accepted the morning tea and took a light sip. Though the toxicity was extremely hidden, it was completely different from usual morning tea. The poisonous queen had actually increased the poison dosage. I set down the teacup, asking the little elephant attendant if there were any activities all nobles would attend recently. The little elephant attendant thought for a moment, responding, there was a meeting in 2 days, everyone had to attend. I picked up the morning tea and drank it all in one gulp, calculating that day was precisely the most suitable time to make the poison tea completely disappear from my life. So for now, let the poisonous queen freely run rampant before then. After drinking the tea, I silently took the antidote the great mage had given before. The little elephant attendant curiously asked what I'd been taking the past few days. I casually lied it was health supplements, also joking my body was weak, needed good care. Then I suggested we go to the breakfast gathering early today. The little elephant attendant quickly agreed, saying he'd prepare immediately. Since the incident at the equestrian performance venue. The second prince never appeared at breakfast gatherings again. This suited me fine. Didn't want him disrupting my plans anyway. Looking at the first prince beside me, I mentioned the roses in the garden were about to bloom. He looked at me, expression calm and unmoved. After a while, the first prince stood up, left without looking back. The little elephant attendant looked confused, asking why I suddenly mentioned roses. I responded coolly, saying I'd seen roses while walking. Recalled the first prince personally planting roses. Didn't mean anything else. After that, I went to exercise in the garden as usual. Barely practiced before. Getting exhausted and gasping for breath. While resting, the great mage appeared. Looking at my somewhat pale complexion, he teased my condition seemed worse. Doing this every few days, did I have a habit of abusing myself? I explained if I didn't exercise stamina, the situation would only get worse. He asked what I wanted from this old man this time. I said directly there were two things I wanted to ask him. First was needing to know two people's identities. Second, wanted him to investigate some nobles' suspected involvement in suspicious cases, especially concerning the poisonous queen's family. The great mage smiled, saying these two things weren't difficult, just teased I loved ordering my master around too much. I said the poisonous queen would soon start trying to check me, but she'd have difficulty acting against mages. Now is precisely when I needed his power. The great mage raised an eyebrow, joking I wanted to use him as a shield. I shook my head, correcting it wasn't a shield but a weapon. And not just him, I needed many mages to help. Recalling my past life's tragedy, I frankly said I knew better than anyone how powerful, well-trained archmages were. So this life, I definitely had to form my own magic legion. Hearing magic legion, the great mage was greatly shocked, reminding me archmages weren't like knights, very difficult to grow through training. I firmly told him this was possible. I told the great mage about my previous life. Back then, when the king proposed forming a magic legion, no one agreed with him, but the king ultimately succeeded in forming the magic legion. However, after the magic legion stabilized, the king passed away, his cause of death highly suspicious. After that, the magic legion fell into the hands of the second prince who inherited the throne. Then the second prince used the magic legion to wage war on my homeland. My gaze firm, I said I couldn't let the magic legion fall into the second prince's hands again, and I'd be the one to initiate its formation. So I planned to use the poisonous queen poisoning me to negotiate with her. The great mage, puzzled, asked what I'd negotiate with the poison tea, also wanted to know what specific method I'd use. I smiled, saying it was a secret, but he'd know soon enough. The great mage helplessly said that was truly a reassuring answer. I suggested he go chat with the king. Surely the king had many ideas. Meanwhile, at Hessia Palace, a maid reported to the poisonous queen that they'd increased the poison dosage as she ordered. The poisonous queen instructed her to handle this matter well. Recently, all she'd heard was bad news. Shouldn't let her hear any more annoying things. The maid quickly agreed she understood. Just then, the second prince suddenly appeared, his tone impatient, saying the poisonous queen was doing useless things again. The poisonous queen retorted, saying because the person who should be doing things did nothing, she had to work so hard. The second prince said he came to tell her not to waste such effort. But the poisonous queen said this wasn't something a powerless person like him should say, lamenting her bitter fate. The second prince clenched his fists, turned and left angrily. The poisonous queen smiled evilly, cursing him as weak, also saying she'd eliminate all obstacles for the second prince. On the day of entering the palace, Reaver watched his sister, who kept humming songs, asked if she was very happy. Was she that excited about entering the palace? His sister nodded with a smile, saying because entering the palace meant seeing the prince. Also saying she liked the prince, really hoped evening would come quickly. While I was changing formal wear inside the palace, I called over the little elephant attendant, saying I needed him to do something, then pulled out 2 letters from my chest and gave them to him. The little elephant attendant worried it would be dangerous for me to face the poisonous queen alone. I smiled, telling him to hurry deliver the letters. As long as the letters were delivered, I'd be safe. I headed straight toward where the poisonous queen was. This would be the turning point of everything. The little elephant attendant followed my instructions, riding out of the palace to deliver letters. 1 letter to the Mage Association, another to my master. The little elephant attendant felt vaguely uneasy, remembering similar situations had happened before, but thinking again felt he was probably overthinking. The prince would definitely be fine. Meanwhile, inside the Mage Guild, the guildmaster looked at materials in hand, couldn't help sighing. Just the public suspicious death cases were so many, yet these cases still hadn't been reported. Truly suspicious. The great mage said it was because they couldn't report. Those nobles afraid of trouble simply didn't dare raise these questions with the Brisson family, otherwise the next mysterious death case's protagonist might be themselves. The guildmaster curiously asked what the prince wanted to do with these materials. The great mage didn't know what he wanted to do either. Just then, the door was pushed open. The little elephant attendant rushed in, seeing both the guildmaster and great mage were there, couldn't help feeling relieved, then produced the letters, explaining these were from the prince for both of them. After the great mage read the letters' contents, he urgently asked the little elephant attendant where today's dinner banquet was being held. The little elephant attendant, puzzled, asked what was wrong, reminding without invitation letters, one couldn't enter the banquet. The great mage shouted anxiously, saying there was no time to argue about this, your master might die. Only then did the little elephant attendant see the letters' contents, learning the prince was betting his life to find the poisonous queen. Also saying if an accident occurred, please ask the great mage to come rescue. Actually, an hour earlier, I'd already been alone in a room with the poisonous queen, looking at her before me. I said directly, let's stop wearing masks. The poisonous queen closed her fan, saying what would honesty change? I coldly responded, I'm telling you to take off your mask, not asking you to throw away your manners too. The poisonous queen sneered, saying she thought I wanted to say something, turned out just wanted to show off verbally. She'd even briefly looked forward to it, what a regret, saying the blood in my body was indeed lowly. I stopped circling, cutting straight to the point, bringing up the poisoned tea, telling her she should stop now, saying I'd been enduring drinking it before, but recently it was so nauseating I could barely swallow it. The poisonous queen feigned innocence, saying she completely couldn't understand what I was saying, didn't know why I was bringing this up. I'd anticipated her denial, calmly saying so you don't know, then pulled out a vial of medicine, explaining this could temporarily stop the heart. I continued, Silver had no reaction to this medicine, magic reagents also couldn't detect it. Though I had Sisfanian's blessing, my heart shouldn't stop beating, but the blessing's power could only do one thing at a time. While stopping this medicine from taking effect, the poison from the tea I'd drunk would spread throughout my body. I looked at her asking, so who would people suspect first? The poisonous queen suddenly burst into laughter, mocking whether I thought things would develop as I imagined. Also saying, did I think this was her first time doing such things? She arrogantly admitted everyone in this world knew she was the one who sent my mother to heaven. I asked expressionlessly what she wanted to do. The poisonous queen sneered, saying, just try it then. I picked up the tea on the table, tilted my head back and drank, calmly saying then, I take that as her refusal. The poisonous queen looked at me, cursing inwardly, foolish creature. Even the king didn't dare casually move against her. I actually thought anyone dared suspect her. The poisonous queen's heart swelled with arrogant certainty. In Kairos, there was nothing she couldn't obtain, to get everything she wanted, to eliminate those thorns blocking her path. Step by step devouring and accumulating, she firmly grasped the power she most desired. Only the throne remained, the one deficiency she'd yet to completely control. The announcement that the banquet was about to begin had just fallen when I suddenly began coughing violently. The poisonous queen laughed, saying I was merely a stepping stone for her ascent to the pinnacle of power. Also saying, let's bet on who could laugh last. We two arrived at the banquet venue one after another, and before even entering, my body fell uncontrollably to the ground. Surrounding me immediately rose a chorus of shocked cries. The first and second prince's faces changed drastically. The king's pupils contracted sharply. The wine glass in his hand crashed to the ground. The poisonous queen saw this, immediately shouting loudly for someone to call the divine official. That reaction so practiced as if it had always been thus. The guards looked panicked, speculating whether I'd been poisoned. Guests began whispering, some wondering if the drinks at the banquet had been tampered with. But immediately someone refuted. His Majesty the King hadn't even raised his cup yet. How could I have drunk first? Others speculated the poison was administered much earlier, quietly discussing who had been with me before the banquet began, yet quickly fell silent out of fear. The poisonous queen thought triumphantly, see, no one dares casually accuse me of being the culprit. This time, I still win completely. The king flew over like a madman to embrace me, hoarsely screaming my name, while urging the divine official to hurry, while tightly gripping my hand telling me not to fall asleep. I weakly called out father. This call instantly reminded the king of my mother's appearance on her deathbed. Back then, she had also weakly reached out her hand like this, entrusting him to take good care of their son, mother's figure, and my figure. Overlapped at this moment, the king's heart felt like it was struck hard by a heavy hammer, surging with endless regret and heart-wrenching pain. He swore he absolutely couldn't let tragedy repeat. The poisonous queen feigned a terrified expression, saying such terrible things actually happened in the palace. She was so frightened she didn't want to stay here anymore, wanted to return to Hessia Palace. The king, holding me, suddenly looked up, his eyes full of bloodshot, then sternly questioned the poisonous queen why she wouldn't even spare this son of his. The first prince's expression was grave, his gaze sharp as a torch staring at the poisonous queen. The second prince clenched his fists, his chest heaving violently. The poisonous queen turned back in shock, and this question made the entire venue explode, everyone whispering to each other. Actually, everyone had long harbored doubts but never dared speak openly, never expected the poisonous queen would be so brazen, completely disregarding the royal family's dignity. The poisonous queen showed no fear, directly calling the king's name, feigning innocence, saying she didn't understand what he was talking about, also falsely claiming I'd been plagued by illness all along. The king was furious beyond measure, exposing that when my mother collapsed, she had also summoned all Brisson knights and said the same words. The poisonous queen refused to admit it unto death, insisting my mother died of illness. Even if the king said so, there was no way to make her into the culprit, also saying I was born weak and sickly. No one would agree with the king's accusations. She also said someone knew about my physical condition, proposed asking the princes who saw me every day at breakfast gatherings. The king trembled with anger, angrily rebuking her that was enough. But the poisonous queen still acted hypocritically, saying she was like this because of worry. If they continued arguing, she feared our child's situation would become worse. Hearing the words, our child, the king completely exploded, furiously rebuking her for daring to call the third prince our child. Just then, the second prince who'd been silent suddenly turned around, coldly saying the poisonous queen was the least qualified person to say such things, also directly saying the third prince's body had no problems, he'd never felt I was in poor health. The poisonous queen was so angry at the second prince's betrayal she gnashed her teeth. Amidst the chaos, someone loudly announced the divine official had arrived. The poisonous queen took the opportunity to turn and leave. The king couldn't be bothered with the poisonous queen, only urging the divine official to quickly use divine power for healing. But that divine power had just touched my skin, when it was violently repelled by an invisible force. Just in this chaos, the great mage arrived in time. He shouted loudly to stop everyone's rash actions, saying doing this was equivalent to killing me. The king was both shocked and angry, his arms holding me trembling slightly, questioning why the great mage was blocking them. He roared, saying the third prince couldn't hold on anymore, must be treated immediately. The great mage explained, there was a magic ring on my heart. If the magic ring and divine power collided, even with good luck I'd end up with an exploded heart and dead. The king anxiously asked what to do. If divine power couldn't be used, would magic work? The great mage shook his head, saying only a healer possessing natural power had a thread of hope for me. Using magic was impossible. The king collapsed roaring, telling the great mage to quickly think of other solutions. Couldn't he see I was in pain? The great mage looked at my suffering appearance, his vision gradually blurring. A memory sealed for many years surged to mind. Back then his son had also coughed blood like this, growing cold bit by bit in his arms. At that time he, like the king at this moment, could only watch helplessly as his loved one walked toward death. As consciousness was about to sink, I relied on instinct, weakly calling out master. The great mage took a deep breath, raised his hand to gently touch my forehead, the motion extremely tender. He murmured softly, never expected in his lifetime he'd cast this spell again. Me in his arms, in his eyes, was gradually overlapping into his son's appearance from years ago. The next second, a gentle pain relief spell's magic power instantly enveloped me. The pain receded like tide. At the same time, on the streets outside the palace, papers flying everywhere pointed directly at the Brisson family, butchers who killed 37 people. The Brisson family was instantly swept into a storm of public opinion. The family's past towering evil deeds overlapped with the current poisoning suspicions, triggering strong public condemnation, everyone demanding blood for blood and expelling the poisonous queen from the palace. Seeing this, nobles all felt endangered, fearing any connection whatsoever with the Brisson family. The great mage took the opportunity to relay my plan to the king, saying the third prince wanted to create a magic legion. They could use the poisonous queen being forced into a desperate situation to implement the plan. Hearing the words magic legion, the king was extremely shocked. This was exactly what he'd always wanted to do. He couldn't help murmuring, rare to have someone with the same idea as him. A week later, I was receiving a visit from the poisonous queen on my sick bed. She looked at me, her tone complex, saying the Mage Association was really busy. She didn't even know they'd also prepared those materials exposing the family's evil deeds. I responded coolly, couldn't understand at all what she was saying, also falsely thanking her for her care, letting me rest for a very long time. The poisonous queen's expression darkened, saying I'd lingered at death's door for a week. My voice sounded quite safe and sound. I coughed lightly, saying I almost went to meet the king of hell, couldn't chat with her too long. If there was nothing else, please leave. The poisonous queen's eyes flickered, saying she wanted to exchange conditions with me. I smiled, saying what she should have agreed to a week ago. Now the situation had reversed. She indicated I should state the conditions first. Also proposed if I came forward to clarify those materials weren't factual, she wouldn't oppose what I planned to do. I couldn't help laughing aloud, directly saying she seemed to have misunderstood something. From the beginning I didn't need her permission, asked back if she had no other cards left. The poisonous queen's face turned ashen, gritting her teeth, asking what exactly I wanted. Looking at her iron fan, a strong obsession surged in my heart. What I wanted wasn't just to save my life, but to quell that approaching war. I calmly stated my conditions, hoping the Brisson family would withdraw the Pavel Knights. The poisonous queen was shocked beyond belief, incredulously asking back if I meant withdraw all of them. The Pavel Knights were an important gift the Brisson Marquise gave the poisonous queen to check the king's personal guard. Eliminating them was equivalent to weakening half her power. I firmly added, disband the Pavel Knights and support my creation of the Magic Legion. Other than this, I won't compromise. The poisonous queen bit her lip, silent for a long time. I gestured to the little elephant attendant. He immediately walked before the poisonous queen, handed over a contract containing a vow seal. The poisonous queen saw the words vow seal. Her expression changed drastically. Asked what exactly I wanted to do. I explained, this was magic that carved the contract's contents onto each other's hearts. If the agreement was violated, the heart would immediately suffer destruction, instant death. Between you and me, this wasn't any trustworthy relationship. Only such a deadly vow could allow peaceful cooperation. I looked at the poisonous queen, my tone calm, telling her to decide for herself. Her fingertips trembled slightly, her gaze wandering back and forth between me and the contract, clearly weighing pros and cons. I quietly watched her, yet had already predicted her choice. I saw her lower her head, staring at the contract on the table, only a flash of struggle in her eyes, then immediately snatched the special brush dipped in contract ink from the little elephant attendant's hand. The brush tip crossed the paper. The poisonous queen unhesitatingly signed her name. Golden magic runes instantly lit up. The contract took effect. This life-staked agreement was thus completed. The magic power carved into our hearts bound the poisonous queens and my lives tightly together, never again to be separated. After that, the poisonous queen violently smashed the brush to the ground, suddenly lifted her skirts, turned to storm out the door. I calmly added, our brotherhood was never good. That day, the second prince stood up, not for me. If you'd said one more word of defense then, father would have drawn his sword on the spot and beheaded you. Hearing this, the poisonous queen's footsteps suddenly halted, standing dazed in place for a moment in contemplation. Only then did she realize her son had been considering her from beginning to end. Yet she'd been so foolish as to think she'd been betrayed by her own son. Truly ridiculous to the extreme. This power struggle, who could laugh last, remained unknown. As the words fell, the poisonous queen stopped lingering, quickly turned and walked out of the room. In the garden, the first prince was concentrating on pruning roses. Suddenly heard an attendant's report. The third prince had just awakened when the poisonous queen immediately came to visit. The first prince's fingertips paused. A rose flower inadvertently fell. He stared at the petals, couldn't help but sink into contemplation. In a trance, he remembered before the third prince lost consciousness. They'd shared a momentary eye contact. The third prince had also said the roses would bloom soon. The first prince instantly understood. From the beginning, the third prince wanted to pull him into this melee. In fact, he'd previously been observing out of curiosity about what this rose would bloom into. As thoughts flowed, he also remembered his usually willful second brother had actually voluntarily stood up to speak for the third prince. Various details connected, the first prince's heart suddenly understood. Indeed, something was quietly changing. On the other side, the great mage said, hearing the poisonous queen came to find the third prince, hurriedly rushed over. I casually tossed an eaten banana peel while casually responding bananas were really delicious. The great mage looked at my relaxed appearance, his tone carrying some helplessness, saying the third prince seemed to have a good appetite. I smiled and nodded, saying, anyway, ultimately the goal was still achieved. The great mage suddenly became serious, questioning how I could still smile. He said fortunately that pair of elf siblings appeared in time, otherwise right now it might be visiting me at my grave. If Reaver's sister wasn't a healer possessing natural power, I'd probably already be lying in a coffin. I was also somewhat surprised, didn't expect Sweet Sister was actually a healer. The great mage asked if I didn't know. I shook my head, saying in my past life I only had contact with Reaver. But when I encountered Reaver, his sister was no longer in this world. The great mage grew more agitated, blaming me for directly drinking poison, lying down for a whole week with no countermeasures. Also asked what I was thinking. How could he feel at ease and trusting matters to me in the future? teacher. I somewhat guiltily called out, "Master, I was wrong," also handed him a banana trying to ease the atmosphere. The great mage sighed, pulled something from his chest and tossed it to me. I puzzledly accepted it, discovering it was the identity proof I'd previously asked him to help process for Reaver and his sister. I asked the great mage while opening it to check whether forging proof documents was difficult. Only saw their surname was actually Baron. The great mage explained it borrowed my previous name Baron. Also said he guessed these two children weren't ones I accidentally encountered and brought back. Looking at it, I suddenly discovered this proof wasn't forged but genuinely valid. I gratefully said Master considered things so thoroughly, making them look like people who originally lived here. The great mage said it was the king who helped facilitate it. The great mage changed tack, saying outside everyone was spreading that the third prince was the king's most beloved son. How did I feel? I froze, asking back if there really were such rumors. The great mage smiled in response. The king showed such excitement before nobles for me, how could such rumors not appear? I was silent for a moment, thinking darkly, these feelings shouldn't belong to me in the first place. After the great mage left, I told the attendant to clear away the banana peels. But the little elephant attendant suddenly looked stern, his expression serious. Then said heavily there was something he needed to report to me. Said he decided to resign from his position as my attendant. I was shocked, asking why. A sealed memory surfaced in the little elephant attendant's mind. In childhood, the room on the far right of the mansion's second floor always filled him with guilt. Back then he often chatted with his brother. His brother always lay dazed on the windowside couch, while he lay on the bed chattering about outside happenings. The Candyman grandpa at the alley entrance had set up his stall again. The neighbor's little dog learned to shake hands, who solved the difficult problem the teacher assigned. He spoke with enthusiasm, but didn't notice on his brother's pale face. The smile hid undeniable melancholy. Later his brother's condition grew worse and worse. By chance, he overheard his father's conversation with others, learned his father had tried countless methods to save his brother, also commissioned mages to make medicine but to no avail. At that young age he still didn't understand how cruel it was to describe things beyond reach to someone who couldn't personally experience them. Until later his brother sternly told him not to avoid eye contact, to properly look at the fact he was step by step walking toward death. Then one day, the house suddenly caught fire. In the chaos, someone shouted and carried him away from the inferno, and his brother, the day before his 15th birthday coming-of-age ceremony, chose self-termination. From that day summer went, autumn came, then welcomed winter, until hearing cicadas again, he shut himself in his room. Father really couldn't stand watching, forcibly brought him out of the room. He obediently lay on his father's shoulder, his expression still carrying some confusion. His gaze inadvertently swept the courtyard, suddenly discovering a child curled up in a corner of the steps. He puzzledly asked his father who that child was. Grand Elephant Duke told him that was this country's third prince. Quietly watching the third prince's lonely lost appearance, a strong feeling of mutual suffering rose in his heart. The memory ended. The little elephant attendant again firmly said he decided to resign from his attendant position. I was both shocked and anxious, saying this was too absurd. The little elephant attendant looked full of guilt, saying although he always stayed close by my side, he knew nothing about me, even personally offered up the poisoned tea that made me collapse. He blamed himself for ignoring those places he clearly noticed were wrong. When I encountered danger, he also wasn't able to guard by my side. I nearly died, yet he still couldn't understand the situation. This time again, it was his neglect that caused great error. His brother's face surfaced again in his mind, the guilt in his heart even greater. I suddenly grabbed both his shoulders, making him look at me, sternly asked who the person standing before him now was. The little elephant attendant looked at me, chokingly answered it was Prince Kalian. I nodded vigorously, saying this way do you understand I'm still alive. From the first time I opened my eyes here, you've been by my side the whole time. That I could persist until now was all thanks to you. Because you didn't ignore me, that's why I survived. Although up to now, I also don't seem to know that much about your affairs. But one thing I'm certain of, you'll continue protecting me in the future, right? The little elephant attendant could no longer hold back. His legs went soft as he knelt and cried. I was instantly somewhat at a loss, hurriedly told him not to cry. Quickly get up. The little elephant attendant thought silently. Father, I seem unable to go back. I have someone I want to protect with my whole life. After crying, the little elephant attendant spoke, saying he'd eliminate everyone who made me like this. I looked at his agitated appearance, smiling, asking why he suddenly said this. Was he going to help me take revenge? The little elephant attendant suddenly jumped up, shouting he could do anything for me, also heartbrokenly muttering I was so seriously injured before. I quickly interrupted him, saying enough, don't say more. Elephants should behave themselves, otherwise it'll cause war. The little elephant attendant anxiously stammered, saying forget war. Even if he cast aside his Siegfried family member identity now, it wouldn't matter. He suddenly reacted, surprised, asking how I knew the elephant designation, then asking when I discovered it. I smiled, saying it was discovered accidentally. The little elephant attendant collapsed, shouting how could it be discovered accidentally, also exasperately complaining his father was an idiot. I laughed heartily, saying let's make a bet, betting whether I'd grow taller than little elephant first, or little elephant would become grand elephant first. Drip drop drip drop, the rain outside the window gradually ceased. I gradually entered dreamland. In the dream, I opened my eyes wide. Before me actually appeared the original third prince's figure. We two stood face to face. The original third prince's face carried a gentle smile. My heart was full of surprise. He walked toward me step by step, walked directly before me, then he smiled shallowly, passed through my body. I instinctively turned back, saw the original third prince smiling as he ran toward the little elephant attendant and short-haired maid, standing intimately with them, also turned to show me a smile from the heart. I clenched my fists, slowly reached out my hand toward him. The original third prince showed a surprised expression, then smiled slightly at me, yet didn't hold my hand. He seemed to softly say something. My heart was suddenly shocked. He smiled again. The next second, I suddenly felt myself beginning to fall, kept falling down, until until I could no longer see the original third prince's figure. A cool breeze struck. Turns out the wind blew the window open. I suddenly awoke from the dream, slowly sat up. Outside the window, the sky had just begun to brighten. I went out to the riverside, using Kairos' method, held a simple memorial for the third prince. The great mage asked if the original third prince completely disappeared. I nodded in response, indeed so. The great mage didn't understand why the third prince left so hastily. Really didn't know what the rush was. My mind suddenly echoed with that blurred speech. That was the voice the original third prince left last. He said that life is for you. You must obtain everything you want to possess, and live happily. If the previous life was a kind of shackle to him, then I also somewhat envied him, finally obtaining true freedom. Things had come to this. I wouldn't pretend ignorance about all this anymore. I'd already done too many things. Also accepted the third prince's entrustment. From now on, I should properly live my second life. A month later, the Pavel Knights were rapidly disbanded, the king's power further consolidated. The great mage formally announced they would form a magic legion, and my body had returned to normal. The clothes I usually wore were obviously too small. The little elephant attendant looked at me, proposed having the tailor come alter the ill-fitting clothes. He smiled, adding, saying the prince was at the age of growing, clothing size changes were normal. I nodded in agreement, frankly saying indeed quite a few clothes had sizes that were already too small, rather than laboriously having the tailor alter each piece. Might as well take this opportunity to custom make new ones. After changing clothes, I came to the king's reception room. The king saw me, smiled and beckoned, saying I'd grown taller again compared to last meeting, also gotten a bit fatter, complexion really good. I smiled in response, saying I'd just grown up a bit. The king turned to ask if various matters for the coming-of-age ceremony were prepared. The great mage spoke at this time, saying for the coming-of-age ceremony, he needed to introduce someone to me. He said that person was the mage who'd protect my safety during Rosalita this time. Blue Mage came forward in greeting, saying meeting me was his honor. My heart was suddenly shocked, didn't expect to encounter Blue Mage here. The king added from the side, saying Blue Mage was very talented personnel in the Magic Legion. Let me learn from him along the way, get along well with him. I instinctively grabbed my chest area. This really was an unexpected special birthday gift. I turned to ask the great mage, when was the Magic Legion expected to be established? The great mage smiled, answering, the first step was to come up with the Legion's name, from specific personnel allocation to uniform customization. All matters weren't yet decided. The road ahead was still very long. Now they were just beginning to take the first step. Today, gathering everyone together was also for this matter. The great mage proposed leaving the Magic Legion's name for the king to decide. Hearing this, I smiled lightly, calling the great mage. This time he asked the right person. The king nodded slightly, his expression carrying some certainty. Then frankly said, he'd already thought of a name long ago. It would be called Balkan. The great mage joked. Seemed the king had been waiting for him to ask. If he hadn't asked, it would have been bad. The king retorted, saying the great mage asked him first. As the two argued back and forth, I turned to ask Blue Mage how was it. Blue Mage froze, didn't react for a moment. I explained. I was asking how he felt about calling the Magic Legion Balkan. The great mage at the side smoothly interjected, smiling, asking Blue Mage if he didn't think it was a great name. Blue Mage quickly nodded in agreement. Indeed, a very great name. Seeing no one objected, the king smiled and decided, confirmed using Balkan as the Magic Legion's official name. Later, in a secluded forest, I told the great mage about my history with Blue Mage. The mage was somewhat surprised after hearing. Didn't expect we had such a past between us. Also asked if I wanted to switch people out. I shook my head, saying no need to do that. The great mage was somewhat worried. I firmly told him, the current Blue Mage was different from his past self. The future I knew had also changed with the times. However, I wouldn't easily let him off. After leaving the palace, I quietly came to the Baron's residence. The Baron saw me, quickly bowed in greeting, his tone carrying some feeling of being flattered. I indicated he should sit, saying long time no see. This time I came because I couldn't be discovered by others, so didn't contact in advance, could only hide my identity to visit. The Baron quickly said my arrival was his honor. I didn't beat around the bush, saying directly, this time I came to call in the favor of saving his life. Then asked what Pollen Merchant Group had been trading recently. The Baron truthfully responded, saying not long ago they just began diamond trading with the Divine Nation, Dan here. Also had horse and equipment trading with the royal family. But he knew these weren't the answer I wanted. Finally added, saying currently there were no other ongoing trades. I continued asking him, besides managing the merchant group, could other areas also be managed well? The Baron confidently responded, as long as there were sufficient personnel and money, nothing couldn't be done. I nodded, reminding him, although there were personnel and money, the Brisson family would definitely interfere. The Baron puzzledly asked back, wouldn't I be by his side? I answered without hesitation, that's right, I'd always be there. Then I couldn't help laughing aloud, saying seemed I'd asked a bad question. The Baron, seeing this, immediately said with personnel, money, plus me checking the Brisson family, then there'd be no problem. Seeing this, I directly stated my purpose, saying we were planning to create the Magic Legion. The budget was sufficient, also had people who could manage the great mages, now only lacking a manager. The Baron puzzledly asked, was this the method of repaying the life-saving grace? I shook my head, saying the grace of saving his life, he'd already repaid. The Baron's eyes were firm, saying, then he'd do his utmost. I cheered silently in my heart. Done. The original who should have died at the 15-year-old coming-of-age ceremony, after my arrival changed destiny, I kept all the people I could trust by my side. What remained was to meet Sisfanian's oracle at Rosalita. Asked clearly the reason all this happened. The scene came to the evening of my birthday. Nobles all gathered in the palace banquet hall, in unison wishing me happy 15th birthday. I accepted everyone's congratulations, step by step walking toward the center of the banquet hall. The second prince leaned alone against the palace pillar, his expression complex. I actively walked forward, smiling greeting, saying long time no see. The second prince still used that insulting designation, calling me Blood Eye. I put away my smile, seriously telling him, brother, I won't turn a deaf ear to this insult anymore from now on. My name is Callian. The second prince sneered, then directly said I wasn't Callian. My heart jumped, didn't expect he'd actually noticed. The second prince sneered once, stepped forward, his eyes sharp, saying, you can ride horses, use blades, and talk back. These were all things the previous Callian wouldn't do, then pressed asking who I was, seeing I didn't answer. there. The second prince walked another step closer to me, telling me to hurry up and confess. I instinctively clenched my fists, cold sweat seeping from my brow, but in my heart I admonished myself I was no longer the prince who lost his homeland because of the second prince. The person before my eyes also wasn't yet that mad king who destroyed Cyclidia. I slowly released my hands, smiled saying, right now I can't understand what you're saying. After all of this still needed confirmation from Sisfanian's oracle about the ins and outs before saying more. Right now I couldn't tell others any information about myself. During the ball's break time, I found the great mage and told him about my conversation with the second prince. The great mage said to me in a low voice, even if the second prince acted like a hooligan, he absolutely wasn't someone with shallow thinking. I was somewhat surprised, asking back if the second prince had such an image in the great mage's eyes. The great mage nodded, saying the second prince was actually a very calm, rational person. The great mage continued saying, although the second prince should first pretend not to know, but of course wouldn't truly believe. I puzzledly asked, make him believe what? The great mage reminded me, I'd already said before I was no longer someone else, just the third Prince Galleon. I nodded, responding, saying I indeed said so. The great mage also said although I'd decided to abandon Baron's identity, to completely forget the past probably wasn't so easy yet. Then pulled out a ring from his chest and tossed it to me, saying if occasionally there was need to reference this old man's opinion, he was willing to worry together with me. I curiously asked if he'd cast communication magic on it. The great mage nodded, confirming, saying except for the range Sisfanian's abilities could reach, other places could all connect, although it couldn't be used inside the palace. As long as outside the palace he could reply to me anytime. I happily agreed, saying this feeling was really good, like being together with Master all the time. The great mage looked at me, asked if I was worrying about something. After all, weren't those accompanying me now all people I trusted? I hesitantly asked back, was it really so? At this time, a knight came forward, respectfully greeting me, saying he was the commander leading the Siegfried Knights. Their knights would escort me to Sisfanian's cave located in Siegfried territory. I looked at the neatly arrayed, imposing knights, instantly felt very reassured, except what was with the indignant anger on their faces. At this time, the little elephant attendant smiled and came forward, saying it was time to depart. I instantly understood. The knights belonged to the grand elephant family. I used their high and mighty young master as an attendant, so they couldn't stand it. I smiled mischievously, telling the little elephant attendant to get me something to drink. The little elephant attendant immediately understood, telling me to wait a moment. Sure enough, the knight's anger burned even more vigorously. The great mage at the side helplessly said, really couldn't stand me. Why go looking for trouble creating enemies? I didn't care, felt it was fun. With a call to depart, everyone performed their duties. Embarking on the journey to Rosalita, watching crowds stop to wave and cheer, knights in silver armor arrayed in formation marching forward. Blue mage followed calmly in the formation. Reaver siblings walked side by side. I'd already made full preparations in my heart. Before leaving, I deeply bowed to the great mage. The great mage nodded, telling me to be careful. I solemnly responded, turned to urge Raven, catching up with the advancing formation. Kairos Prince's coming-of-age ceremony officially began. The great mage returned inside the palace. The king couldn't help worrying, saying the third prince had already experienced a serious accident before, really should have let the great mage go along. The great mage advised the king to let go of such needless worry, saying compared to me outside, the king staying inside the palace was more dangerous. The king asked back if he didn't worry. The great mage joked the king had been indifferent all these years, now starting to worry was too late. On the other side, in the advancing formation, I held up the communication ring in my hand, softly muttering, was the great mage in the palace now? The little elephant attendant at the side responded, heard Dan here sent envoys into the palace. The palace should be very busy now. I sighed somewhat regretfully. The little elephant attendant quickly said he could chat with me, told me not to be gloomy. I couldn't help laughing, saying these past days always looking at the same scenery, including him. The little elephant attendant pretended to feel wronged and shouted, saying he so seriously accompanied me talking, how could I say such things? What I didn't know was, the little elephant attendant last night seriously instructed the knights, protect the prince well. He emphasized the prince was as precious and fragile as a flower, so must be extremely careful. After the knights heard, their hearts were even more indignant, thinking their young master as Siegfried's eldest son, actually for this kind of person gave up the young family head position. Feeling the waves of anger coming from behind, I could only helplessly think, just how long would they stay angry? The little elephant attendant turned, asking if I wanted to rest here briefly. I was about to respond, but suddenly stopped. The knights immediately went on full alert. Blue mage and Reaver also flashed before me. A faint presence entered perception. Immediately after hearing a call for help from not far away, a young elf ran out from behind the trees. After introducing herself, she said aggrievedly she was very hungry. The knight commander came forward asking if she came begging for food. I looked at her panicked appearance, asking what she was doing. The elf answered quietly, saying she was hiding, also apologetically saying she was sorry. I felt this conversation was strange, vaguely sensing something wrong. I asked if she'd just called for help. The elf nodded. Only then did I realize the seriousness of the problem. I quickly looked toward the direction the elf ran from. At this time, a yellow-haired man chased over. I quickly removed my cloak, draped it over the elf, then arranged for Reaver to protect her closely. The knight commander immediately blocked in front of us, providing cover. Yellow Hair said he was chasing a thief, asking if we'd seen a suspicious child. The knight commander said didn't see any, told him to quickly leave. Yellow Hair explained he came here not to provoke or stir up conflict, just wanted to find someone, would leave after confirming. I stepped forward asking what the person he was looking for looked like. Yellow Hair responded, saying it was a young elf. I nodded, saying then he could confirm, but if not found, he'd have to take responsibility for his actions. us. Hearing this, the elf trembled slightly, hiding deeper into Reaver's embrace. Reaver comforted the elf, telling her to trust me. Yellow Hair insisted on going forward, just as he was about to approach the elf. I suddenly spoke, telling him not to look back. I told him, those people following behind him, their killing intent was directed at him, they weren't protecting him. Once he confirmed that child's identity, arrows would shoot over. Hearing this, Yellow Hair instinctively looked back. Several cold arrows had already broken through the air. I swiftly swung my blade, knocking down all the incoming arrows. Having saved Yellow Hair, I grimaced and said lowly, told you not to look back, now it's troublesome. The moment arrows broke through the air, Blue Mage reacted extremely fast, instantly activating magic to construct a protective barrier, blocking all incoming attacks. The accompanying knights immediately shouted loudly to protect the prince. The knight commander made a decisive judgment, ordering some knights to chase and investigate, while warning not to pursue too far to avoid ambush. I looked toward the direction the arrows came from, understanding in my heart, the arrow rain didn't continue falling, seemed the attackers had already chosen to retreat. That yellow-haired man we saved secretly used peripheral vision to observe the surroundings, his eyes full of vigilance. Reaver turned to instruct Blue Mage, telling him to watch over that elf child, while he quickly came to my side to check the situation. Reaver had just walked before me when suddenly his expression changed drastically, shouting loudly to warn me to watch out behind. Everyone had no time to react. Already saw a black shadow had quietly enveloped me, the sharp blade thrust directly at my heart. I instinctively dodged sideways, casually blocked this fatal strike. My wrist turned, the long sword counterattacked, directly piercing Yellowhair's heart. The knights seeing this were all shocked, discussing one after another that the prince could actually use magic, or marveling at my swordsmanship. The little elephant attendant was even more anxiously jumping, rushing to my side, constantly muttering, saying what if I got injured, also complaining I'd only learned superficial magic and swordsmanship. Always so reckless, he was really worried to death. But the knights couldn't help refuting the little elephant attendant, saying, young master, what you said was completely wrong. Where was there someone fragile as a flower who could beat enemies like this? I didn't bother with their dispute. Walked forward, pulling off the cloak covering the elf, asked what exactly she stole. The elf frightened shook her head repeatedly, saying the thing was stolen by her companion, she knew nothing. Looking at her pitiful and panicked appearance, I was truly at a loss. Could only call Blue Mage over, having him help clarify what the elf said, also specifically reminding him, this child's answers always came one step earlier than questions. Blue Mage responded and came forward. After some questioning, reported to me, said the elf's name was bestowed by the mother tree, lived in Siliska Forest. The elf traveling with her stole the attacker's things. She got separated from her companion while being chased. After that, she encountered us. As for why she answered questions in advance, she herself wasn't clear. I pressed asking if she had precognition abilities. She quickly denied. I sighed, telling Blue Mage to take her and withdraw. The little elephant attendant immediately came forward asking what I planned to do. I pondered a moment, saying if we let her be alone, she'd soon be hunted again. Anyway, our route was the same. Might as well first send her near the forest. Detailed investigation could be left to nearby lords. At this time, the knight commander came forward, saying there was something he wanted to take up some of my time. He searched out a suspicious thing from the attacker I'd killed earlier. I took that small pouch and opened it. Couldn't help but be shocked in my heart. The knight commander saw my expression was off, quickly asked if I knew what this was. I nodded, responding, of course I knew, because I'd eaten it before. Looked like I had to personally talk with that yellow hair. Yellow hair saw me walking toward him, his expression complex. He said he'd originally thought I was just a rich family's young master. Seemed more than that. I frankly admitted my identity was more noble than he thought, then got straight to the point, asking if he knew what was in that box. Yellow hair honestly answered he thought it was good stuff. That's why he stole it from those attackers. Each of them had one in hand, but he didn't know what it was. I pressed asking what those people were looking for. Yellow hair shook his head, saying didn't know. I continued asking if he recognized those people. He said the others all wore masks, couldn't see faces, also couldn't remember other characteristics. I looked at his eyes, confirmed he wasn't lying, then asked why he helped those people. Yellow hair hesitated a moment, saying those people threatened him with his wife. I immediately promised, no matter what happened, I would protect his wife. Hearing this, yellow hair finally relented, said those people lost something the size of a fingernail, a transparent bead. He also didn't know what it was, but the other party said, must have Donhere's divine official confirm that item to get answers. My heart stirred. Donhere's divine official? Could what they lost be a divine artifact? Donhere's divine officials had always used divine artifacts power to replace divine power. Seemed they were now collecting divine artifacts everywhere. Such a precious item being stolen, the other party having such big movements was understandable. But what puzzled me was, why did those attackers have this kind of medicine? This was medicine Cyclidia spies used for suicide when missions failed, and could only be obtained through White Eagle. Yellow hair seemed to remember something, added he'd heard what seemed like the leader's nickname, called Blue Willow Warbler. Cyclidia spy codename? I repeated the name Blue Willow Warbler, thinking, Father, how come your bird didn't stay in the homeland, but flew here instead? Evening. When we arrived at Ratland, it began pouring rain. The local Lord Count enthusiastically welcomed us into the castle, holding a banquet in our honor. He laughed heartily, saying he really never thought one day he could personally receive the prince. This was supreme glory for him. Also said this rain came too coincidentally, just like heaven deliberately arranged for him to serve me. I looked at his fawning appearance, my mind surfacing the little elephant attendant's previous question. He asked if I had any impression of the Count, saying he was one of those who previously sent me gifts. I'd remembered at that time that name on the gift list, and his gift was also returned by me. I still remembered he originally supported the first prince, but 6 years ago switched to supporting the second prince. After that, immediately sent gifts to me. Truly a fence-sitter. Surely last year he also used this kind of sweet talk, praising the second prince highly, and the attendants here must also work very hard. Halfway through the banquet, Blue Mage suddenly pushed open the door and entered, reporting they'd caught a carrier pigeon. I wasn't surprised, had long anticipated the Count would try to inform Blue Willow Warbler of our presence here, releasing carrier pigeons on such a stormy night. Besides conveying messages, there couldn't be other purposes. The Count saw Blue Mage, quickly enthusiastically invited him to drink. Blue Mage politely refused, turning to ask ask if there were any Danhir divine officials here or nearby. Hearing this, the Count's hand shook, knocking over the wine bottle on the table. He pretended to be drunk, saying it was accidental, also cursing Danhir's divine officials as black-hearted villains with dog eyes looking down on people, saying they wouldn't come to such a remote countryside place. I looked at his clumsy acting, really couldn't stand it. With his kind of rude attitude, it was hard for me not to be angry, so I snapped my fingers, activating sleep magic, putting him to sleep. The old steward quickly apologized, supporting the Count back to his room. I also followed the old steward's arrangements to stay in the castle. Late at night, I took the Knight Commander and snuck out of the castle, and communicated with the Great Mage through the communication ring. I explained the situation to him, saying Blue Willow Warbler was very likely related to Cyclidia spies, and the divine artifact they were searching for also seemed to involve Danhir's divine officials. Also asked if the Great Mage knew the whereabouts of Danhir divine officials nearby. The Great Mage reminded me Blue Willow Warbler had never failed missions. She couldn't possibly not recognize my identity. I said I'd be cautious, asked the Great Mage to help inquire about nearby Danhir divine officials' locations. I had to investigate clearly. What was the spy's purpose for meeting the divine official? After hanging up communication, I followed previous clues to find Blue Willow Warbler's hiding place. She stayed in a rundown tavern working as a server. I pushed open the tavern's creaking wooden door, stepped into the dim interior. Her hand movements paused, but her face showed not much surprise. I had no extra pleasantries, directly got to the point, saying she knew my identity right. Blue Willow Warbler put down the cleaning cloth in her hand, frankly admitted knowing I was the third prince. That's why she warned us not to interfere, but I still acted rashly. She paused, saying I didn't look so easy to deal with. I looked directly at her, asking if the elf chased before died. She gently shook her head, said the elf escaped into the forest, she couldn't catch her. Looking at her micro-expressions, I knew she wasn't lying. Then she showed regret, saying if she'd known things would be so complicated, she wouldn't have chased back then. She indicated the current situation wasn't what she wanted to see, since both sides had no great losses, hoped I wouldn't interfere in this matter anymore. She'd also let the elf child go. I smiled faintly, directly refusing, said having gone to the trouble of finding here, how could I return empty-handed? As long as she answered a few questions, I'd leave once I got answers. I asked why she wasn't a divine official yet searched for divine artifacts. Blue Willow Warbler said divine artifacts were very valuable recently. I asked again if she was selling divine artifacts. She frankly said yes, relying only on main profession earned too little. I pressed, asking why she chose countryside, not Kairos. Blue Willow Warbler explained no one there was willing to pay high prices, and here she knew buyers. I understood in my heart. People acquainted with Cyclidia's spies, who sold Kairos intelligence yet didn't request Blue Willow Warbler provide Cyclidia intelligence, but purchased divine artifacts from her. Only one conclusion remained, namely traitors. I stared at her eyes, asked the final question. The divine artifact buyer was the Count right? Blue Willow Warbler hesitated a moment, said this question was hard for her to answer. I knew asking further wouldn't yield results, so stood to leave. The Knight Commander and I rode back, along the way communicated with the Great Mage again. The Mage told me the Count was lying, he hid the divine official by his side, buying and collecting divine artifacts at high prices, even sold Kairos intelligence to Cyclidia spies. I nodded, saying I'd return to the Count's castle immediately, because I always felt he hadn't truly gotten drunk. Returning to the castle, from far away heard the little elephant attendant and the Count's old steward arguing, so I quickly climbed through the window into the bedroom. The little elephant attendant was still angrily saying he'd already said many times. The prince went out for a walk, accusing the old steward of being too rude, actually repeatedly asking about the prince's whereabouts. The old steward pleaded for just a few minutes, said Lord Count wanted to apologize for his behavior at the banquet earlier, hoped to know when I'd return. The little elephant attendant was extremely angry, saying he was so rude, didn't need to apologize at all, also drove him away. At this time I opened the door, feigning anger, saying the noise made it impossible for me to rest properly. The old steward saw me, greatly shocked, quickly apologized, saying didn't know I was resting inside. I impatiently rebuked the little elephant attendant. The little elephant attendant quickly ran over, apologizing to me, saying it was all because of his incompetence, couldn't handle such a small matter. I directly gave him a cold face, telling little elephant to enter the room for punishment, then heavily closed the door, rainwater still dripping from my body. I stroked my chest, exhaling deeply, just now imitating the second prince's tone to speak. Although it could quickly solve problems, the feeling was really uncomfortable. The little elephant attendant curiously asked how I returned so quickly, also asked if I came in through the window. I smiled awkwardly, saying I also had no choice. He helped me clean up the drenched clothes, while complaining this was the third floor, not paying attention to safety at all. Then he walked to the window, closing it. I asked if anyone came looking for me, or discovered any strange places. The little elephant attendant said only that steward came looking for me earlier. As for strange places, it was the prince who liked treating windows as doors for entry and exit. After the little elephant attendant left, I communicated with the Great Mage again, told him the Count seemed to be guarding against me, investigating his background, and just as I guessed, he wasn't drunk at all. I analyzed, the reason he pretended to be drunk was because today was the day he and Blue Willow Warbler traded divine artifacts. He wanted to avoid my sight, pretending to be drunk to go trade, but failed. After waking from sleep magic, discovering I went out, he should have sensed something wrong, that's why he kept asking about my whereabouts. The Great Mage agreed with my deduction, also asked why the Count would go to such lengths to obtain divine artifacts. I pondered, answering, he should be planning to present divine artifacts to Danhir, switching sides again, standing on the same front as the first prince. The Great Mage added, he maintained contact with the first prince on one side, stood on the second prince's front on another, behind the scenes also sent gifts to me. I continued, he simultaneously also sold Kairos intelligence to Cyclidia spies. This guy really was incredible. Recalling the cause of all this, it was merely that I helped the hunted elf. After that heard Blue Willow Warbler's name from the mouth of the man attacking her. Then learned from Blue Willow Warbler that the Count wanted to present divine artifacts to Danhir to maintain relations with the first prince. If all this wasn't coincidence, then behind it definitely involved an even bigger conspiracy. Since we're already stuck here, might as well take this opportunity to catch this bat hiding in darkness before leaving. At the same time, in the Count's room, the Count was roaring at empty air, cursing me as an ungrateful, arrogant brat. He was certain earlier at the banquet I must have cast magic on him, otherwise he couldn't possibly fall asleep like fainting. He said frantically, because of me, all his plans went down the drain. Also cursed the poisonous queen as a foolish woman. Since she acted, she should have completely eliminated me. He complained he'd always worked hard courting prestigious nobles, spent quite a bit of money for Marquis Brisson, originally already promised to give him a prosperous territory near Kairos, but because of me it was postponed. Just then, the old steward entered reporting, said they still hadn't re-established contact with Blue Willow Warbler. Hearing this, the Count's anger intensified, picking up a water glass and smashing it on the old steward's head. He cursed the old steward as useless. Also said the rain was so heavy I definitely wouldn't leave in the short term. Told the old steward to notify Blue Willow Warbler, postpone the transaction date trade after I left. He roared at a nearby maid, telling her to quickly clean up, swearing he'd properly teach that arrogant commoner prince a lesson. The next morning at breakfast, the Count acted as if nothing happened, but in his heart he was calculating. How could Kairos Count's status be ignored by me? Even if I was a prince, if other nobles knew I randomly cast magic on him, they'd definitely rise up in resistance. He must make this prince who understood nothing bow before him. The Count cleared his throat, saying he made a very serious mistake yesterday. I responded coolly, saying it's fine, but he suddenly changed tack, wanting to ask if I cast magic on him yesterday. Before he finished, I interrupted him. I feigned consolation, telling him not to take this matter to heart anymore. He probably hadn't received royalty before. Making mistakes was inevitable, so I could completely understand him. The Count's heart was full of unwillingness, didn't expect I'd brush it off this way, actually pushing the fault onto him, simply detestable to the extreme. I put down utensils, saying I investigated yesterday's attackers. The Count quickly asked, was it the death row prisoner I brought and held? I nodded, saying yes. Also said during investigation discovered some suspicious points, seemed related to some bird's name. Hearing this, the Count's hand shook again. I looked at his anxious appearance, continuing saying although further investigation of details was still needed, felt this matter should also let him know. The Count immediately stated, saying he'd also assist my investigation, also feigning indignation, saying those attempting to harm the prince were actually in the area. This was also a disgraceful matter for them. At this time, the Knight Commander came forward, saying he had words he wanted to say to me alone. I indicated he should speak right here. After hearing his report, I smiled at the Count, saying that's great, that person just happened to say he had words to tell me personally. After that, I invited the Count to go together. Before long, our group arrived at a remote prison outside the castle. The Count followed behind, looking at the dirty surroundings, quietly cursing. I turned to look at him, smiling, saying hoped he could properly assist the investigation. Recalling last night, I alone went to the dungeon to find Yellow Hair. He saw me, immediately nervously asked if something happened to his wife. I reassured him not to worry, saying I'd already promised to protect his wife. Yellow Hair puzzledly asked why I came to find him. I told him bluntly, continuing like this, he'd be sentenced to death. Once the investigation of attempting to assassinate royalty concluded, he'd be sent back to Kairos to face hanging execution. Even if not executed, if his arm wound continued being left alone, ultimately he'd die from infection. Yellow Hair was silent for a moment, asking what exactly I wanted him to do. I told him, use that arm to repay the price of drawing a blade against me. I'd prepare housing and farmland for them. I could arrange for him and his wife to live in other territories, and he needed to help me with one thing. The memory ended. Our group had already walked to the cell door holding Yellow Hair. Yellow Hair, before everyone, accused Blue Willow Warbler of being a Cyclidia spy. Also said she planned to sell divine artifacts to someone here. Yellow Hair continued, that person had known the spy for a long time, and he was here, right now. I looked toward the Count, indicating he should admit it himself. But before the Count could speak, his old steward suddenly plopped to his knees, said he only followed Lord Count's instructions to do things, knew he was also wrong, but still asked me to show mercy. I didn't expect to not only catch the Count, but also unexpectedly caught his accomplice. I looked at the old steward, asking if he was Danhir's divine official. The old steward's face turned deathly pale. Admitted buying and selling divine artifacts was personally conducted by him. The reason he was so obsequious to the Count was because the other party held his weakness. If discovered he was related to buying and selling divine artifacts, stepping into Danhir territory would cost his life. My heart jolted. Originally thought the Count bought divine artifacts to please Danhir and present them. Didn't expect he was actually selling divine artifacts. I pressed the old steward, asking who he sold divine artifacts to. The old steward answered trembling, sold to the poisonous queen's older brother. I instantly understood. The Viscount was courting Danhir. He betrayed the second prince, chose to stand on the first prince's front. This meant he betrayed his own Brisson family. The trap I set to catch the bat actually caught even bigger prey. After instructing knights to take both of them away, I informed the Great Mage of the situation through the communication ring. The Great Mage asked what I planned to do. I pondered, saying this matter would cause great commotion. Might as well first discuss with the king. I also asked him in his own name to write a letter to the Count for me. After hanging up communication, I instructed the Knight Commander to go help the Yellow Hair imprisoned in the underground dungeon treat his arm wound. Now it was too late for treatment. Probably could only amputate. Remember, after treating the wound, have him take the medicine I gave. The Knight Commander respectfully acknowledged. I also turned to Reaver, telling him to find Yellow Hair's wife, send her to a safe place nearby. After bringing Yellow Hair out of prison, arrange for the couple to reunite. Just finished handling these matters, the door was pushed open, the elf bounced in. Sweet Sister somewhat embarrassedly explained she came to clean. The elf heard there were birds here, so followed along. Also asked me not to blame her. I helplessly shook my head, but inwardly muttered Blue Mage wasn't around, really worrying. The elf curiously pointed at the birdcage in the corner, asking what to do with the carrier pigeon. Would we continue bringing it along afterward? I shook my head, saying this carrier pigeon would be sent away tonight. The elf pulled Sweet Sister together to the birdcage, watching with great interest. I looked at Sweet Sister's fond appearance, said after returning returning to the palace, I'd buy other birds for her. Sweet sister, hearing this, quickly waved her hands, said she and the short-haired maid lived in the same dormitory, afraid her roommate wouldn't like it, so no need to specially buy for her. I said somewhat regretfully, what a pity. Then I spoke, when I go to dinner later, help open the bird cage. Also instructed her, don't forget to open the window, there'll be a visitor. Night fell. I sat alone in the room waiting. Before long, sensed someone approaching. I closed my book, spoke praising Blue Willow Warbler's speed. Blue Willow Warbler stood on the balcony, her expression complex, saying, the letter's contents made her feel deeply. If you don't want what you've done to reach White Eagle, then come find me. Blue Willow Warbler looked directly at me, questioning why I threatened her. I calmly responded, if she could hand over evidence of the Count buying and selling divine artifacts and selling Kairos intelligence to me, I'd keep her secret. Blue Willow Warbler was silent for a long time. I pressed, asking if this was her answer, but she suddenly launched an attack. Several bullets containing powerful magic flew toward me. My heart jumped, remembering in the past she used blades. I quickly activated a magic array to protect myself. The knights outside heard the commotion, immediately shouted loudly there was enemy invasion. I snapped my fingers, closing the door, commanding them in a low voice not to come in. I looked at Blue Willow Warbler, asking if she really came with the determination to kill me. Also asked if she had other tricks. Blue Willow Warbler bit her teeth silently, suddenly jumped up. A short sword appeared in her hand somehow, thrusting toward me. I thought in my heart I only had an ordinary iron sword, couldn't use sword energy, had to quickly decide victory. After several rounds, I knocked away Blue Willow Warbler's short sword. She lost her weapon, but the next second she found an opportunity to get close, releasing magic attack toward me, just about to be killed by her. I dodged sideways, still couldn't help releasing sword energy, while swinging sword to parry. Clang sound. My iron sword directly broke. Blue Willow Warbler looked at me with complete shock, disbelievingly saying how could I possibly be a sword master. I looked at her panicked appearance, suddenly called out her real name. Blue Willow Warbler's whole body stiffened, her expression changed drastically, trembling, asking how I knew her real name. I stepped forward, grabbing her chin, questioning why her mouth didn't contain poison, as a Saclydia spy should always keep poison in mouth. I released my hand, coldly saying, speak out the evidence you know. Blue Willow Warbler staggered back a step, asking if I'd let her go if she spoke. I sneered, saying everyone said Saclydia people would rather die than surrender, seemed she was an exception. I didn't know if this was her nature, or if something changed her. Blue Willow Warbler's eyes flickered, saying I'd better just let her go. She spoke threatening me, as a swordmaster actually carrying weapons worse than guards, just like deliberately hiding strength. If I didn't want to be discovered, let her go, otherwise she'd immediately tell outside knights what she saw. My heart was mixed with feelings. The past Blue Willow Warbler never betrayed Saclydia. She originally used blades, and wasn't someone who'd use such means to threaten others. The her I knew wasn't like this. I stepped forward, grabbing her collar, sternly saying if she wanted to survive, shouldn't do these suicidal things before me. After all, the secrets she knew weren't important enough to be worth sparing her life. So I released her collar, telling her to speak out the truth she knew. Then I wouldn't interrogate her anymore, and regarding her interrogation would be conducted by White Eagle. Blue Willow Warbler's heart died like ashes, confessing everything she knew. At the same time, in the Count's room, he stared at the Great Mage's letter on the table, trembling with anger. The Count gnashed his teeth, thinking the Great Mage dared threaten him like this. Could the Great Mage have noticed his divine artifact trafficking? He thought he'd also had enough of living like a dog groveling. Anyway, he prepared a hiding place. Might as well just leave. He strode toward the hidden treasury, opening the cabinet door. The full room of treasures shone with golden light. The Count didn't take any of them, but walked directly to the deepest part, taking out a carved wooden box, slowly lifting the box lid. The next second, Blue Mage suddenly appeared, raising his hand to close the box, snatched it away. The Count turned back in terror, seeing Blue Mage smiling standing in the room. Blue Mage said he was the third prince's mage, also thanked him for personally bringing out the evidence, then changed tack, would definitely convey to the cunning stinking mage and commoner prince. He was willingly handing these things over. Soon, Blue Mage brought the divine artifacts to my room. He also separately found the transaction records Blue Willow Warbler mentioned were hidden in the tavern, as well as evidence of selling Kairos intelligence. I accepted the box, saying to him, you've worked hard, thanks to you, this chaos was finally coming to an end. The little elephant attendant at this time hurried in, excitedly saying, Prince, you should look outside. I stood and walked to the window to look, only saw outside the castle neatly arrayed a knight order. They wore uniform armor, imposing presence. I recognized that was the king's directly subordinate knight order, Yahello. They should be protecting the king and Kairos. Why would they come here? And at this time, inside the palace, the Great Mage was complaining to the king, asking why he dispatched the personal guard Yahello to the third prince. Previously, clearly agreed to send the royal knight order. He reported what happened in Ratland to the king. Wasn't for him to do this. The king explained, couldn't send the royal knight order. This matter was related to the Brisson family. If their people mixed in, it wouldn't be good. Could only send people he trusted. The Great Mage also said the king clearly knew the consequences of doing this. Such favoritism toward me had no benefits for me. Instead, would make my life constantly under threat. Also said previously the king deliberately acted indifferent to everyone to avoid such things. The king was silent for a moment, said he couldn't let such things repeat, so he decided to show care to each prince. Tomorrow noon, he'd also personally have lunch with the two princes, conveniently see how their relationship was. The Great Mage helplessly said, seemed the king would enjoy a warm time. On the other side, the Count's old steward was brought before me by the knight order. I told him subsequent matters would be handled by the Yahello knight order. All criminals would be sent to the capital, where punishments for them would be decided. Also told him some died before being sent over. I thought inwardly Yellow Hair was confirmed as deceased, had been safely sent away from the castle. He should now be heading to Whiteland territory with his wife to start a new life. The old steward plopped to his knees, saying he only did those things because he owed a lot of money, knew he made a great mistake. I looked at him, saying although his involvement in illegal divine artifact trading was very serious, but I also requested the knight order to be lenient with those who contributed to capturing major criminals. I continued, the position of Ratland territory management agent is entrusted to you. In the future, he must wholeheartedly pledge loyalty to me. The old steward looked completely shocked, disbelievingly asking if he really could be territory management agent. After receiving my affirmative answer, he quickly kowtowed in thanks. After handling Ratland matters, the journey to Sisfanian's cave resumed once more. Along the way came much news. The count was currently sentenced to life imprisonment. His title had also been revoked. As for Blue Willow Warbler, she was publicly executed. Heard that day Kairos Square was covered with Renacita leaves. Its leaves had very strong water absorption. Spreading them on the square was to prevent criminals' blood from staining the white ground. This also meant criminals faced public beheading. News also came from the palace. The first and second princes recently had some conflict. The first prince determined those who previously attacked me were sent by the poisonous queen. The second prince refuted, saying the first prince had deep misunderstanding, said his mother absolutely had no such intention. The first prince also brought up, heard after the third prince left, the second prince never touched alcohol again. The second prince asked back if the first prince missed the alcohol smell on him. The first prince shook his head, saying he only hoped he could learn to be quieter. As the words fell, he stood and left. The second prince, hearing this, on the spot bent the fork, harshly threw it on the ground. He roared, already like this, what more quiet did he want? And my journey wasn't smooth. Just left Ratland not long, encountered mudslides triggered by heavy rain. The knight commander suggested